Educational webinars. Welcome everyone to the educational webinars for 2025. That's amazing to me that we're in 2025. I am Peggy West and I am the class webinar organizer, and I'm excited to have you all for the new year of classes ahead also as well. I have new planned classes and I will be bringing you professional speakers like in the past years of many topics for association property needs, as well as legal webinars to assist with the Florida laws too that you need to be aware of and correspond to. I would like to have you, if at any time you come across a class or you have an interest to hear something on a topic, please email it to me and I'll start searching for a good speaker for you. So let's get started with some quick housekeeping. First, this does satisfy your 4-hour request for board member training. You will be certified by the attorney Jane Bolin, who's giving this class. This class will be recorded and sent to you for your review. However, note that no one can receive a certification credit unless you are participating live today. We have Datalytics that retrieve the email addresses you registered with. That's what's recorded, and that is the proof of your attendance today for Jane to proceed with the certification for a record. All right, also know that you must stay on the webinar a minimum of 3.5 hours. You can enter your questions in the Q&A box. If you have a comment, enter into the chat box. We record these for proof of your email address that you attended today, okay? All right, also note that you may stay on the webinar a minimum of 3.5 hours. I mentioned that. That's very important. We are kicking off with the following sponsor professionals, beginning with myself. Again, I am Peggy West. I'm the owner of Market Smart Unlimited and have been organizing and planning, executing professional educational association webinars for about 10 years. So plus we will offer marketing services for those who may need something extra. All right, let's go on to the sponsors that are on today because we have a lot to cover. They're going to quickly introduce themselves and their business. And I'm going to start with Vinteum Software. Vinteum, we got Katie Bassford on. She's the National Account Manager. And Katie, will you tell us about what you do for associations, please?
Yeah, thank you so much for that intro, Peggy. As Peggy mentioned, I am the National Sales Executive at Vinteum. So I'm representing our company today, and we work with Peggy a lot on these webinars to host and put them on. But outside of that, Vinteum is an 11-year-old company that provides websites and software solutions for community associations. So this can include HOAs, condo associations, as well as larger property management companies. And we do serve thousands of communities across the US, but right now we have about 50% of our clients based in Florida. And really the reason for this strong concentration in Florida really is due to our 100% compliance with state laws. So keep in mind that a lot of those updates and legislation do go into effect at the end of this year, at the end of 2025. So if you have any questions about compliance, or if you are looking to get a plan and a software to make your community compliant, I would love to chat in more detail. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to get a live demo scheduled.
Awesome, thank you so much. And this software company is the wind beneath my wings. I want to make honorable mention, and I wish you'd wave Beatrice. She's our marketing manager for Vinteum. And again, they offer website assistance and a great price and great service. So consider them if you're looking. Next, I want to introduce COA Solutions. We have Daniel Baum on. He's the founder and CEO and today's moderator. Daniel, tell us about yourself and your business.
Good morning, Peggy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Happy 2025 to everyone. Very simply, I specialize in commercial property and casualty insurance. My job is to save money for communities on their property and casualty insurance. We're very diligent. We look very closely at small details. And by doing that, we're able to find past mistakes, issues that other people may have overlooked, and find savings for our clients that they didn't know were there. So if you feel like you're paying too much for your community's insurance and you want me to take a look, we offer a free review, nothing to sign. Please feel free to reach out to me after the webinar. Thank you so much. I hope you guys all enjoyed today's seminar. You have a wonderful speaker with Jane, and I'll be talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. All right, next I want to introduce from First Citizens, Jamie Gelfand. She's the Vice President and Regional Sales Officer for Southeast Florida Community Association Banking. That's a mouthful, but she's great. She's worth it. So Jamie, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Peggy. Good morning, everyone. As Peggy said, my name is Jamie Gelfand. I'm the Regional Sales Officer at First Citizens Bank covering the Tri-County area. First Citizens is a 125-year-old top 20 bank. In the CAB, Community Association Banking Division that I work, we provide lockbox and loans to associations, homeowners associations, condominiums, and co-ops. So as you're working on your milestone for 2025, if you have financing needs, please give me a call. I'm happy to assist. And as Daniel said, you're going to enjoy the next 4 hours. Jane's got a lot of information to share, and I'll put my information in the chat. Enjoy the class.
Thank you so much. Also, I wanted to just mention, she's not on, but the paving lady, we have Dawn Miller. She's the Director of Business Development. They do an outstanding job on helping associations with their paving needs. Next, I want to also mention Best Roofing, Diana Alert. She's the Senior Business Development Manager. Also, her complement is Cameron Andres. He is also representing for business development for Best Roofing. They are based out of the Broward County area, but they do cover quite a bit of the state. So if you need someone for roofing, great contact, great business, and great company. They've been around for about 50 years. Next, I want to introduce Faster.io. We have Bob Aleka on today, the Vice President of Community Development. Bob, tell us about yourself, what you're doing. You got a lot of things going on.
Good morning, all. Bob Aleka here with Faster.io. Wish everybody a happy new year. We specialize in multi-gigabit fiber optic right to your home. It's symmetrical speed, so whatever you get down, you get up. It's limitless what we can provide. It's just a matter of what you're looking for. We also provide streaming TV, which you can take with you, which means that if you wherever you live, you can change your zip code and not only get all your national channels, but you get all your local channels of the zip code that you live in. In addition, we've been providing and building and managing fiber optic systems for most of the service providers here in Florida. So we have a 20-year history of doing this. So there's no job too small for us. So if you're 15 or 20 units, even above, please give me a call. We'd be more than happy to come out, let you know what we can do for you. If you're within 2 years of your current agreement or less, that's even more important to give me a call so we can show you what we have and give you a demonstration. So enjoy the class today, and hopefully we'll hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob, so much. I want to make honorable mention too of Michael Zaren, Vice President of Marketing for Faster.io, very greatly involved and excellent resource if you can't reach Bob. Next, I want to mention or introduce from Benjamin Moore, I've got Rudy Forehand, the District Manager. Rudy, tell us about yourself and what you're doing in the South.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to all. Peggy, thank you very much for inviting us, and to all the sponsors, hello. Rudy Forehand, as Peggy said, I am with the Benjamin Moore Paint Company. I work with Regal Paints, and we sell paint simply. We sell paint for all the surfaces on your community or your buildings, but we specialize in working on your bigger projects. You're going to be, you heard Jamie talk about the loans that you'll need for some of your bigger projects. Well, when you're doing restoration and concrete work, you have to paint your building afterwards. And we're the ones that can help you along with that project. We don't apply the product, we sell the product, but we assist you in becoming we help you become paint project managers, and we assist you along the process to make the process easier for you, to answer your questions so you can know the answers before you ask the questions to the contractor. So we do that for you, and we'll partner with you, all for just using our products, Benjamin Moore Paints through Regal Paints Company. So if you have any questions, we do color rendering, specifications, color consultation, anything regarding paint, just feel free to give me a call, and I'll be more than happy to work with you. I've got 36 years with Benjamin Moore and working from all the way from Orlando down to Fort Lauderdale. So give us a call. Be more than happy to help you. I'll put all my information in the chat. Happy New Year, and you're going to be enjoying a great class. This is a good one. So have a great year. Thank you, Peggy. Appreciate it.
Rudy, thanks, Rudy. Okay, and just in the nick of time, we have Ben Friedman, the president of City Quiet, who just signed on. Ben, glad you could join us. Tell us about yourself and what does your business do?
Yeah, Peggy, thank you. I'm sorry, I was just finishing up something. Thank you again for including us and all the other sponsors here. You always do a great job of putting these events together. My name is Ben Friedman. I am the president and owner of City Quiet Windows and Doors. We provide turnkey white glove installations for all window, door, storefront, and railing projects. We could be a great resource for you, as many of the other sponsors have suggested they could be as well. I hope you enjoy the class, and if you have any questions, I'll put my contact info in the chat.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. Great company again. I try to always get the best professionals for my audience. Next, I want to introduce Daniel Pena. He's also the president of PD Concrete. Daniel's not on, so I will just say that he is primarily in South Florida and does a great job. Now, all these sponsors will be on a sponsor sheet that I will send following the class. So look for their contact information, especially if they're not here today. Next, I want to introduce United Professional Engineering. Today we have Brian Ramel on, a business development contact. Brian, tell us about yourself and what's going on over there, that busy engineering firm.
Thanks, Peggy. Appreciate it. Happy New Year to everyone. And once again, thank you so much for having us, United Professional Engineering. We are a structural engineering firm. I'm sure everyone at this point has heard about milestone recertification inspections. That's really our bread and butter. We've been doing work in the condo world long before these inspections became mandatory. The owner of the company is a very established and accredited individual. He's got a lengthy list of acronyms after his name. So anything that you need from a structural engineering standpoint, we've got you covered. His name is Carmelo Giglio. My name is Brian Ramel. I will drop my information below, and thank you again for allowing us to be involved in the webinar today.
Okay, thanks, Brian, so much. And I do want to highlight that Carmelo is the incoming president for 2025 for the FHEA, which is the Engineering Association for the state of Florida.
FSEA, Florida Structural Engineering Association. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for the backup. Okay. All right, next I want to introduce a couple of people. I first was contacted by Damaris Cabrera, the business development manager for Clarkson and Varick. If you haven't heard of them, this is my first time to have the opportunity as a sponsor. They are elevator people. And there are many buildings that have elevators, so this will be a great source for you. She has Lucas Caredeff on today. He's a partner and co-founder. He's going to do the introduction. Lucas, tell us about yourself and the business.
Sure, thanks, Peggy. Yeah, we're actually an elevator consultant. We don't actually work on the elevators themselves versus a contractor. We're actually a consultant that works with ownership groups to help manage modernization, new construction projects, as well as your day-to-day. I think all of you in the real estate business understand how difficult it is to deal with elevator companies. We basically are your advocate. We have 30 plus years in the business. I used to own an elevator contracting company myself, and now I assist property managers and owners to make sure that they're getting what they paid for, that their contracts are protecting the property, and that when big repairs, major repairs or projects come along, that they have an expert on their side to understand the ins and outs to make sure they're getting the best price and the best quality for any project. So I think Damaris will probably drop her info in the chat here, and we're here to help. Any elevator questions you guys have, problems, whatever, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you get to the bottom of it.
Okay, next I just want to mention, because they are not on, but Age of Empire Construction Company is also sponsoring today. They are very busy, just like Brian and everyone, I guess. But Daniel LaRosa is the business development manager, and the owner is Marcel Alonso. He's the president, very involved. And if you need some sources for bids, please reach out to them. And then last but not least, I have Hafer Company on. I want to introduce Mark Landez. He's the audit principal at the company. Mark, tell us about yourself and what do you guys do?
Thank you, Peggy. Happy New Year, everyone. I want to wish everybody the best, healthy, wealthy New Year possible. Start off with some positives. Hafer's been around for 45 years, doing full service CPA firm style service in Florida. We do audits, reviews, compilations, as well as tax returns for our associations. And one of the big issues you guys are going to be dealing with is a lot of concerns with the information with your SIRS reports going into your audits. If you haven't had a chance, make sure you just touch base with your accountants now. It's going to be a very busy year, a lot of new changes and a lot of new information. So make sure that you get in touch, and I'm happy to help anybody here looking or needing some casual advice.
Peggy, you're muted.
Honorable mention, I have to mention Nicole Johnson. She has also been outstanding sponsor for many years now, and she is a partner and also the CEO of operations. So if you need anything, they've got several offices around the state. And at this point, I just want to mention again, you will be getting a sponsor sheet, and also going back to the Q&A. We already have 468 people on, so many of you are going to have questions, but Jane is going to go through her presentation, take a few pauses, but we are recording all of the questions. So if she doesn't get to you at the end of your question, just put your name if you want her to respond, and following the webinar, she will be answering those questions. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane. Jane, I'll let you introduce yourself, and everyone enjoy the class. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. So good morning and Happy New Year. And I applaud you for the first Monday of the year to go into this 4-hour board certification. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen now, and we're going to get started. Let's see here. I want to make sure this is correct.
Jane, while you're working on that, let me just real quick to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, as Peggy mentioned, we have almost 500 people on the webinar today. We're going to have a lot of questions, I'm sure, come up along the way. A couple of things just to reiterate. Number one, the chat. If you put questions into the chat, I'll do my best to monitor it, but I can't guarantee I'm going to see it. So please, if you have questions specifically, there is a Q&A function on Zoom. Put your question in the Q&A function. It'll come up separately. And as Peggy said, include your name so that if we don't get to answer your question live on the webinar, we can do our best to get you the answer after the fact. The other point I want to mention one more time for Jane's benefit is there is an enormous amount of information she's going to be trying to cover. She cannot answer legal questions that are going to be specific to your community. She is an attorney, but she's not necessarily your attorney. So please be mindful that if you ask questions that are specific to your community, we likely will not answer them live on the webinar. They may or may not get an answer after the fact, depending on the legality of it, but likely you'll be instructed to just go back to your own community's attorney for clarification. With that, Jane, if you're ready, I will stop talking and turn it over to you.
I'm ready. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, folks, good morning again. My name is Jane Bolin. I am an attorney and the founder of PeytonBolin. What makes me a little bit unique is I actually was a CAM before I became an attorney. I owned and managed a Foundation Property Services, which was a management company, and sold that in 2010 and have been building a law firm ever since. And what we do is we represent community associations in the state of Florida, all throughout the state, despite being Broward based. Okay, so let's get going. Let me make sure this is all working. So today, this is a course for board certification for condos and HOAs. Note that that does not include cooperatives. So if you're here for cooperatives, you are not going to get a certificate. If you're here for condo or HOA, you will get a certificate. So being very clear about that. Logistics have been said, but I need to say them one more time. You must attend this entire webinar to receive credit. Peggy talked about the data. We have you logged in. We know when you log out. There can only be one person per registration and only one certificate per registration. So if you are sitting with a group of people right now, what you need to do is every single person has to register separately, turn on the webinar, they can put it on mute, turn down the volume, and you can watch one. But it's one per registration, and there's no exceptions to that. There will be short 5-minute breaks when we see the option. We are going to use the Q&A function, and if you lose connection, log back in immediately. If there's a data log off when you log in, there is a data log when you log in and log out, saying it one more time, which is used to determine course participation. If you have trouble during the course, you can email Cara at PeytonBolin to explain the situation, and she will support you while the course is happening. Again, our objective is not to give you a certificate, but I have been approved with very strict requirements, and I have to be sure this is done correctly. Okay, so we're going to start right from the beginning.
Katie, I'm sorry, can you just share that email address maybe in the chat or so that everyone knows if they get a problem?
Cara at PeytonBolin.com. There you go.
Perfect. That's for anyone who has technical difficulties along during the seminar. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so words matter is what we're going to start with. Very simple. You may think, yes, I understand the difference between an HOA and a condo, but people use the word HOA for condo all the time, and they use condo to talk about assessments. They say HOA fees when they're talking about condominium assessments. An HOA is not a condominium. A condominium is not an HOA. Words matter. There are different statutes, and this is the funnest visual of the whole course, guys. But you can see, you could describe these in the same way, but they're two very different things. Okay, words matter. Now, what are we doing today? So this is a 4-hour educational requirement that has to be done within 90 days of election or 1 year prior to being elected. If you were elected before July 1st of this past year, then you have until June 30th of 2025 to complete this. Otherwise, if you're getting appointed or elected this year, you have 90 days to complete this course. For condominiums, what is different and new is that now, not beyond the 4 hours, there's an additional course, and it's 1 hour annual education requirement. And it generally is going to be about the changes to the 718 statute. But I just want you to be clear, you have another course. It's not just one course. You have to do it every year, one continuing education hour. In an HOA, very similar, same thing, the 4-hour course within 90 days of election or appointment. But then you have way more education requirements. So in an HOA homeowners association, if there are 2,500 parcels or more, then you must have 8 hours of continuing education annually. I'll let that sink in, 8 hours. If you have fewer than 2,500 parcels, then there is 4 hours of continuing education that's required. That is a lot of work, and you need to plan for it to be in compliance. So what happens if a director does not timely file the educational certificate? They are suspended until they comply with the requirement, and the board may temporarily fill the vacancy during your period of suspension. So just being very clear. How long does the certificate good for? 4 years in an HOA. And for condominiums, it's 7 years. And this is only for the board's uninterrupted term. So if you are on the board and you quit, or you're on the board and you take a year off and you took this course, you said, well, I thought it was good longer than that. No, I'm sorry. You have to be, it's a continuous time on the board for this to be good. So when do you get your certificate, right? Number one, you must complete the entire course and your participation is being tracked. Somebody asked us earlier, what does that mean, participation? It means that you're logged in and we assume viewing this. So, there's some good faith here, and, the honor system, you have to be following along. Could you turn this on and walk away? Sure, but you're not going to learn anything. And the whole point of this morning is to learn something new that you didn't know. The certificate is going to be emailed to participants by January 16th. And don't email about updates. Just trust the process and understand with 472 participants, That's a lot of work, and we have to individually create every certificate and email it to you. So it's not like a mass email. So my office is doing that, and we're doing that for everyone, whether you're a client of ours or not. So just please trust the process and do not email us until after January 16th if you didn't receive it. So what are we covering today? A whole lot. So for condominiums, milestone inspections, structural integrity reserve studies, elections, record keeping, access and maintenance, financial literacy and transparency, the levying of fines, notice and meeting requirements. On the HOA side, we're going to be talking about the foundation, which is the Marketable Record Title Act, the Declaration on Florida statutes. We're going to talk about elections and then the exact same things: record keeping and maintenance, financial literacy, levying of fines, notice and meeting requirements. Now, this is a combined course. So you need to be on your toes to hear whether this is condominium or this is HOA. So do not just assume that it's one or the other. Again, go back to that slide where you saw the Dalmatians. Words matter, and you need to be sure that you're hearing the right thing. But there is more. So the division, after last year's changes to the statutes, have received a lot more funding and a lot more authority to support associations throughout the state. So the division, prior to turnover in the condominium world, could enforce compliance with 718 rules relating to construction, sale, lease, etc. But after turnover, their authority is broadened. So they can now look at disclosure of conflicts of interest. They've always been able to look at elections, including voting requirements and recall of board members, removals of board members and officers, records access and maintenance of records, procedural completion of the SIRS. So I'm just going to pause really quick. We've been dealing a lot with this because the deadline to complete, well, to waive your budget for this year for SIRS compliance, which I'm going to get into at length, was December 31st, right? So at this point, you have to email the division your actual report. This is a procedural completion. This is not a review of your report. This is not a determination of whether it meets the budget requirements. This is not a determination about the validity of the report. It's literally a check mark. So just be very clear about that. The division also has procedural aspects of meetings, any written inquiries by unit owners to the association, and procedures and records related to financial issues. Now, in the HOA world, the division's arbitration section is jurisdiction over recall and elections, but now they also have meeting requirements, levying of fines, suspensions, budgets and reserves, official records and maintenance, financial reporting, notices, and of course, the whole election process. So there's been if you've been in this space of associations for a while, this is a complete expansion as to what the division can actually do. Okay, so let's start from the top here. Milestone inspections and SIRS. So the reason I'm giving you this context, I think we all know about it, but it is the reality of how milestone inspections and SIRS were created into the statute. So on June 24th, 2021, we had 98 people lose their lives. And I am not placing blame on the board or the management, but what we do know is that necessary repairs that were required were not done. Okay, that's the bottom line. And at that time, except for Dade and Broward County, there were no mandatory condominium inspection laws in place, and there were no laws mandating that condominiums maintain reserve accounts. Now, there's always been the requirement to be fully funded in condominium worlds with the opportunity to waive or partially fund. But there's never been a requirement for what we're calling the structural integrity reserve components. So that is now changed, and now we have milestone inspections and SIRS. So what do you need to know? Again, this is condominium, not HOA, but those in an HOA, I would just say, I'd be pretty interested in this because you know people who live in condominiums, and most people do, a lot of people do, and you want to be aware of what the legislature is doing to support community associations. And some people might say to meddle with, you know, depending on your thoughts about government overreach, let's call it that. But I don't think it's overreach in this case. I think it's a response to and let's call it, we're trying to figure out how to best support the balance of not-for-profit boards and the fact that you're running the business of an association. So associations existing on or before July 1st, which are controlled by unit owners other than the developer, must have a structural integrity reserve study completed by December 31st of last year. And that's for each property on the condominium that is 3 stories or more. An association that's required to complete a milestone inspection in accordance with 553 on or before December 31st may complete the SIR study simultaneously with a milestone inspection. And in no event may it be done after December 31st, 2026. Now, I'm going to give a little pause and say to you, there's already a whole lot of legislation that is swirling for the beginning of our legislative session. So who knows what's going to change this session? We did not get an emergency session prior to this year, but there's a lot of discussion about changes to the statute. That being said, what I'm telling you now is what is currently the law. So the milestone inspection itself must be performed by December 31st of the year in which the building reaches 30 years of age, based on the certificate of occupancy for the building, and then every 10 years thereafter. Local enforcement agencies, which is your city government and or county, may determine that the local circumstances involving environmental conditions such as proximity to the water may require that it be performed every, by the time you're 25 years of age and based on the date of certificates. So they've got some leeway here to say 30 is too long. It's got to be 25 because you're sitting on the beach. So if the milestone inspection is required or an inspection completed for a similar local requirement, which again, generally is Miami-Dade or Broward, was performed within the last 5 years and meets the requirements of this law, such inspection may be used in place of the visual inspection portion of SIRS. If you're curious about this or wondering whether you've done it yet, then there's a much bigger conversation to have because most associations are well down the road. But there is a chance that you're a self-managed condominium, 3 stories or more, and this is the first time you've heard it. If that's the case, get with your attorney as soon as possible to determine how to best move forward. The association may arrange for the milestone inspection to be performed and is responsible for ensuring the requirements and for all costs associated with the milestone inspection. This is a cost of doing business for the association without question. So in Miami-Dade and Broward County, and I know there's many of you that are not from those counties, but there's many of you that are. So I just want to point this out. They have their own safety inspections that are even more stringent than the new statewide milestone inspection. Not only do you have to pass recertification for structure, but you also have to pass electrical in both counties, and the height does not matter. So in Miami-Dade, the building goes through a building recertification for structural and electrical if it's 2,000 square feet or more, and in Broward if it's 3,500 square feet or more. And the exception to that is 1 and 2 family dwellings that are exempt and fee simple townhomes. So now that we know what, you have this sort of context of SIRS and milestone, the milestone inspection itself, after notice is received to complete the milestone, within 14 days, unit owners must be notified of the required inspection and provided the expected date of completion. After receipt of the milestone report itself from your engineer, and within 45 days, the association must distribute a copy of the inspector prepared summary of the inspection to each unit owner by mail or personal delivery and by electronic transmission. You must post a copy of the inspector prepared summary in a conspicuous place on the property and must publish the full report and the inspector prepared summary on the association's website if required to have a website. Milestone inspection services may be performed by a team of professionals with an architect or an engineer acting as a registered design professional in charge of all the work, and reports signed and sealed by the appropriate qualified team member. So a couple things I'm just gonna riff on here. The reality is we don't have enough engineers and architects in the state. That's why Peggy said Brian was very busy when she was introducing him as a sponsor. It is a difficult situation, but you do need to be sure that you have this team led by a professional that can do the work. Let's see, let's move forward. So what does the association actually have to do? The association needs to bid out the job and choose the contractor to perform repairs to the satisfaction of the building official. That's the point of the report. The milestone inspection itself is done in 2 phases. There's the visual examination, and this must be completed within 180 days after the owners receive the notice that the inspection is due. And if there's no signs of substantial structural deterioration to any building component, then phase 2 is not required. The completion of phase 1 of the milestone inspection means the licensed engineer or architect submitted the inspection report to the local agency. And I would say to you at that point, there's also what I just said the association needs to do, which is provide that copy, put in a conspicuous place, and place on the website if required. And then phase 2 is, oh, there are structural deterioration in the building, and there may be destructive or non-destructive testing at that point. So that is a lot more invasive, which means they actually have to get into the building and determine, you know, perhaps what is causing cracks, why they're seeing it if they can't see it from the outside. And that's my layman's terms for that. The architect or engineer must submit a sealed copy of the inspection report with a separate summary at minimum of the material findings and recommendations of the inspection report to the association. As board members, what I want you to understand is you do have the requirement to put that whole report up, but really the summary is key, and it's a good part of the legislation where it actually is creating it in, let's call it, words everybody can understand versus having to thumb through a 100-page report that you're not sure about. And it must be filed in the official records of the association. At minimum, the report must meet the following criteria again: bear the seal and signature, indicate the manner and type of the inspection, identify any substantial structural deterioration, state whether there's any unsafe or dangerous conditions that were observed, recommend any remedial or preventative care, and identify and describe any items requiring further inspection. Single family, 2 family, 3 family, 4 family dwellings with 3 or fewer habitable stories above ground are exempt from the milestone inspection requirements. So I'm gonna take a pause really quick, take a sip of water. And I did say we're gonna have breaks. We just got started, but we will have one, I promise. It'll give me about 25 minutes. Okay.
Jane, can I just ask one quick question that's popped up several times? The viewers would like to know if we're providing the slides after the presentation.
I can provide the slides.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll provide them in PDF format, no problem. So the definition of SIRS, so Structural Integrity Reserve Study, so now we've gone from milestone inspection to SIRS, okay? So Structural Integrity Reserve Study means a study of the reserve funds required for future major repairs and replacement of the condominium property. And what it requires are these components: roof, structure, including load-bearing walls or other primary structural members and the primary structural systems, fireproofing and fire protection systems, plumbing, electrical systems, waterproofing and exterior painting, windows and exterior doors. And then the last bit is a bit of a catch-all: any other item that has deferred maintenance expense or replacement costs that exceeds $10,000, and the failure to replace or maintain such item negatively affects the preceding items as determined by your licensed engineer or architect when performing the visual inspection portion of the SIRS is required. So I'll just give you an example. Like what do you think that might be? Well, it could be an elevator system. So again, and it may be that they look at the electrical system and say across the board, we're going to add that. So we're starting to see very different responses, how that's looked at, but certainly it is both a legal and engineer/architect professional determination on what falls into what I'm calling a bit of a catch-all. So residential condominiums that are 3 stories or higher must complete the SIRS every 10 years. Visual inspection and reserve study may be completed by any person. We've gone through this. And the report must identify each of the condominium properties being visually inspected and state the estimated remaining useful life and the estimated replacement cost or deferred maintenance expense of the item, and provide a reserve funding schedule with a recommended annual reserve amount. That is the key. And for many, many years, we've had reserve studies done in the state of Florida, and that is the formula. what is the estimated replacements cost or deferred maintenance of each of the items? And as I've said many times in the past regarding reserves, this doesn't mean, and in this case, obviously we need professionals as required by statute. But prior, I would have boards say, well, we don't need to hire a reserve specialist. We can determine how much is it going to cost to replace the roof. And it's a layman's analysis and doesn't take into account, the useful life, labor costs, materials down the road. So the reason I bring this up is it's important to be able to make the business decisions of the association as a board member, but it's also important to know when that is outside of your really purview. Even as an attorney, if I had an architect or engineer on a board, I would ask them not to give us their opinion, because we need to have a separate opinion from a professional hired by the association. So within 45 days after receiving the actual study, the association has to distribute a copy of that study to each unit owner and deliver a notice that the completed study is available for inspection and copying upon written request. Within 45 days, the association must provide a statement to the division that SERS was completed and also provide or make available to each, or was provided or made available to each unit owner. By January 1, 2025, the division must create a database of associations that have completed the SERS. So that is what I said in the very beginning. This database does not mean the division has reviewed your SERS. It does not mean they have said your SERS is a thumbs up. It means a very neutral, we have a database of who's done it and who hasn't done it. And that is it. There's no determination about the validity of the report or the quality of the report. Important note. The deadline to complete SERS has passed. Condos could have waived funding for this year, and if they did not waive funding, there's no choice with the 2026 budget. Those SERS components, A through G that we just looked at, have to be fully funded. An association may complete the SERS study simultaneously with a milestone inspection if they're required to complete it on or before December 31st, 2026. It must be completed and funded by December 31st, 2026, regardless. And associations may satisfy the requirement with a previous milestone inspection or inspection performed if the inspection was performed within the previous 5 years. The inspection may be used in place of the visual inspection portion of SERS to produce the required funding schedule. So most important is SERS is about funding your reserves with a qualified professional opinion. That is the simplest way to put it. So with SERS funding, and this is really the practical stuff, right? I know the board's like, okay, this is a lot, but what does this mean to us? Well, if the association does not have funds to make a repair, then it must pass a special assessment. That's you. If you either have the funds or you don't. If you don't have the funds, you have to pass a special assessment. If the documents require a vote of the owners to borrow the funds, the association has to seek a vote to do that. Now, I will already tell you, I know that there is out in the universe some legislative changes around trying to state that boards do not need to get a vote to borrow funds because of the requirements of SERS. But that's not the case right now. So you have to follow your declaration. If the owners do not approve either the loan or even a special assessment, that is not a defense to not funding SERS. So you may be asking yourself, what would we do? Now, I'm not here to give you legal advice. I'm here to give you this general education, but I would just say to you this: consider that you have an operating budget, okay, and which includes a reserve schedule. And if you can't have if the association will not, unit owners that is, will not vote for a special assessment, will not vote, then you have to amend your operating budget to increase and include those reserves regardless. Now, there are some other caveats. There are declarations out there that have, the budget can't increase by X percentage. That's actually in the statute as well. And so we'll have to deal with that. But bottom line is there's no defense. That's what I want you to remember. Okay, I'm going to pause really quick. And we're going to shift for those of you that are listening, like, all right, we just talked about condos, but I'm in an HOA. Now we're going to switch to HOA world. Okay. So do we have any, I'm just going to real quick pause. Any question that I can answer this second, Danielle?
Well, we have quite a few questions that are already in the question and
Yeah,
answer.
let me go in real quick. It's Q&A.
Yeah, if you pop into the Q&A and just skim through, there's about 18, 19 questions sitting there. You might find some.
Let me just go into the Q&A really quick and see if I can answer.
Sure.
Just real quick, everyone take a breath, including myself. Okay. A lot of these have to do with the course itself. So let me answer that first. So just generally speaking, so everyone is required to take a 4-hour board certification course, whether you're in a condo or an HOA. If you were elected before July 1st of last year in a condominium, you have until June 30th of this year to do it. So I think if everyone just takes that as a baseline. So if you took the course prior to July 1 of last year, and in that case, not to confuse people, but there were very different requirements. You could have signed a certificate, you could have taken a much shorter course. You just need to understand you need to take this 4-hour course. And if you're on here, guess what? You're here to do that. So that's a good thing. Okay. And the uninterrupted term isn't from prior to July 1, 2024. That uninterrupted term and this 4-hour course is from this moment forward. So just think of it that way. Don't worry about uninterrupted term prior to July 1.
Jane, if people took the course already, will the time they're spent with us today count towards continuing education?
Currently, no.
Okay.
I'll let you know that the division has sent out, and Peggy actually already got with me about this, about the continuing education courses. So they got this set up. It took a lot for them to get this set up and to get everyone really approved. So right now I've actually just submitted those new courses, and those will be very different. And they will be more specific to one topic or so, but this does not count towards that. Unfortunately, this is exactly what it is. Board certification course certificate. Okay.
And just to clarify for everyone, because this has come up a couple of times, people are just asking, the 4-hour that we're doing today, that is effective for their entire term. The continuing education then is different for a condo versus an HOA.
So that's effective for their uninterrupted term. And it is good for 4 years in an HOA and 7 years in a condo. So if you're on the board for more than 7 years uninterrupted, you're going to have to take this 4 hours again. And then on top of that, just to be very clear, so 4 hours is the baseline, folks. And then on top of that, in condominiums, you have 1 hour of additional education. And in HOAs with 2,500 parcels or more, you have 8 hours. And 2,500 parcels or less than 2,500 parcels, 4 hours. Okay. So I think we got that. One of the questions I do want to address regarding DBPR is please understand that they got their funding when the bill was signed. So the new funding that they got started in July 1. Imagine, boom, we got 60 new people plus. And so there's been a lot of, they have to reorganize. It's, you know, they had to hire all these things. And again, no excuses, but that's just the reality of it. So the question, why does DBPR normally take a long time to make their determination or ruling? They actually have some time limits around arbitration rulings. But in regards to responding, I mean, I think it's really an onslaught right now. Okay. A question, we had our 40-year inspection done 2 years ago. Can that count as a milestone? You really should, anonymous attendee who put that in there, you should speak to an attorney to determine that, because it still has to meet the requirements of this statute now. So it very well could, but I cannot make a promise that that's the case. You need to have that looked at. Can the inspection report be posted on a password protected website for owners? Yes, absolutely. It can be, you know, on the website, password protected. Absolutely. Does the milestone inspection have to be recorded conspicuously in addition to on the website? Yes, that's correct. It has to be conspicuous and sent to the unit owners as well, both things. As for plumbing, how far do you need to go as far as pipe? Yeah, I can't answer that, Scott. That is a determination of the engineer. It's not a legal determination. We have the category, we know the requirement, but the engineer and or architect has to make that decision. Yeah, so Sally, the question of seawalls is unsure, and I can't give you that answer. I believe it may fall under number, the catch-all. But again, there's always going to be debate, and unfortunately, I can't give you my legal opinion on that unless I was your attorney and reviewing your specific situation. But it doesn't specifically address seawalls outright in the statute. Mary, correct, it's 3 stories or more. If you only have 2, it's not about the number of units, but if you only have 2 stories, most likely you're not falling under this unless you're in Broward or Miami-Dade, to which case you may still be required to have what's called a recertification. Is the person responsible for enforcement of compliance a local city building official? Yes, Terry, and DBPR, because they're keeping a SERS database, also is responsible to that regard. But ultimately it is a local building official, especially when it comes just to milestone. Linda, I can't answer your question about townhomes. There are exceptions, but I do not know your actual formation, condo or HOA, and I do not know your number of stories. I cannot answer that question. And then I'm just going to do one more. Let's see here, or I'll do a couple more because I know everyone wants to hear them. What's the difference between a condo and HOA? So, you know what, I'll pause on that. Let's go back to that really quick. So a condominium and an HOA. First of all, statutorily, they're very different creatures. They're both common interest communities. In an HOA, generally, you have a fee simple home, and there is not a common element structure. So in a condominium, you own the air in your walls, and you have a declaration of condominium. And in an HOA, it's a declaration of covenants and restrictions that run with the land. So they're very different creatures. They're created differently. But in a condominium, you're responsible for the pro rata share of common elements. And you literally, the common element is the structure itself. And in an HOA, generally, you have a freestanding home, and then the common elements may be things like a clubhouse, et cetera, et cetera. That's the best way for me to sort of simplify the answer to that. Again, this is 3 stories or more unless you have an exception. Will you speak to liability coverage members based on issues being? Yeah. Jeff, maybe you can make your question a little bit more specific. I'm not sure exactly what liability coverage you're speaking to, but there are insurance requirements for both HOAs and condos. I'm not actually covering that today based on the agenda I've given you. But you can if you want to be more specific, I'll come back to it. Okay. If I'm on 2 different boards for the same condo. Yeah, this course is for condominiums and HOAs only, folks. So if you are on 2, you don't have to take a course for each board you're on. If you're on multiple boards, you can take one course, and that will take care of it. And let me see, do I have to take 1 hour in addition to this course in 2025? If you are going to get elected again, you will definitely, and you stay on the board, you will have to take another 1 hour if you're in a condominium. And I'm going to answer that later. Okay, I'm gonna pause on questions. I try to get through as many as I could. I appreciate that, and thank you to our panelists who are marking those as answered as I speak. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm gonna close out real quick, and let's go back to HOA governance. So, foundation of governance for a homeowners association. So first, it's the Homeowners Association Act, which is Florida Statute 720. And it is the recorded declaration of covenants and restrictions. And I'm saying this for both. And so those in condo, listen up. The declaration of covenants and restrictions, or the declaration of condominium, has to be recorded in the county in which the property is located. And when I say recorded, I mean with the public records in your county. And the amendments that you make to either the HOA deck or the condo deck have to be recorded to be effective. So if you have made amendments that are not recorded, they will not be enforceable. That's a very important point. HOAs are also governed by, as well as condominiums, the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, the rules and regulations. So let me explain it in this way. The declaration of covenants and restrictions, or the declaration of condominium, are the rights and restrictions as to how you can use your property, okay? The bylaws are how this not-for-profit business called the association runs itself. So the bylaws are where you see information about the number of officers, you see how elections are going to be done, etc. Articles of incorporation tell us that you are a not-for-profit business in the state of Florida. Every year you file with the Division of Corporations and the state of Florida an annual report, and that costs $61.50. It should be in your budget. And you every year identify that you are a not-for-profit corporation and you have a registered agent. Also, what is the governance foundation for an HOA and a condo is rules and regulations. Now, those are created time to time from board to board. We have some new changes in the HOA law, which I'll get to later this course, about some restrictions around some of those rules and regulations that can be made. But rules and regulations essentially are the specificity of the rights and restrictions in the declaration. So let me pause on that, right? So what do I mean by that? You can't create a rule or regulation unless you have the right to regulate whatever that is you want to regulate in the declaration. So if I'm going to use pet restrictions, and I'm going to put a big asterisk on this. I know we have a lot to talk about, emotional support animals, service animals. Just use this as an example. If you do not have the right to restrict pets in your declaration, you cannot make rules and regulations that restrict pets. It doesn't work because you don't have the right to do that. So you can't just put it in the rules. So that is why you have to source it back. And often as an attorney, I say, absolutely, let the board create the rules. They know their community's best. They know what's most appropriate. But generally, attorneys will review rules and regulations to make sure that you have the authority to actually enforce them. And if you don't, we will then make a recommendation that you amend and record any amendment to the declaration. The other thing I want you to know is Florida statutes, conveniently have 718 and 720, Condominium Act, Homeowner Association Act, but there's other Florida statutes like 617. So 617 is the not-for-profit statute. It's under the business corporations, and it applies to associations. Also, there are things like towing laws, which are statutory that apply to associations. There's Florida Friendly Landscape that applies to associations. So the most important thing you understand here is that there is a structure for governance in terms of what you have to abide by. You are never going to remember all of this. I don't expect you to. But the point is that you remember, you know what? We probably need to check on that. Before we go off and do it our way, let's confirm. Last two things, administrative rules. So the Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes, which we went over DVPR's expanded authority in the beginning, will provide us very clear administrative rules. And this is called Chapter 61B. You can even Google it. And you'll see that there are rules that then give us more clarity as to the statutes. So a good example in a condominium is that in the condominium space, elections are statutory. But what's not in the statute is that the ballots have to be in alphabetical order. So that is part of the administrative rule. So I think it's important that you understand there's, again, a whole world that supports governance. And then the last bit is case law, also known as common law. And this is what you hear your local newspapers, Miami Herald, Sun Sentinel, I mean, you name it, right? They talk about cases that are impacting associations. Here's the thing. Just because they talk about a case that impacts a condo doesn't mean it impacts your condo. Unless the Supreme Court of the state of Florida makes a ruling, it may only impact your district. And most likely you're not aware of all the different districts in Florida. But that's what your attorneys are here to do. And we're here to help you support all of that. So again, I don't expect you to remember all this, but just remember there is a foundation for governance. And if you are trying to restrict somebody's right to use their property, we need to go back and determine at what level is that. And to be quite frank, this is what attorneys do as well. We go through the same process. What does the statute say? What does the declaration say? Are there any amendments? Do we have any case law decisions? And then we render an opinion. Okay, great. So a very unique animal to homeowners associations only. So if you have condominiums, do not think about this. In fact, be glad that this is not something you have to deal with. So every 30 years, your declaration may expire. So this requires a review by an attorney to determine if the Marketable Record Title Act applies. You cannot simply check the date of recording. There are specific legal analysis to determine if there's an exception. And what this really has to do with is the root of title and how it is recorded, the book and page. There's some very specific things that we look for. And sometimes not an entire association's declaration expires, but only specific parcels, which is sort of like a Swiss cheese that happens. So again, I just want the best thing you can know is that 30 years is the number. And yes, you should look and see when were we recorded. Don't wait until you think you're going to expire, speak to an attorney, because if it's less than 30 years, the board can preserve the documents with board action. There's an entire process to it, but it's a board vote and it's relatively simple. If the documents expire, revitalization requires a vote of ownership. A committee has to be created. There's a whole lot of notice and it's way more expensive. So you just need to understand, 30 years, MRTA, Marketable Record Title Act, our HOA covenants could expire. And we need to get with an attorney because it's absolutely a legal analysis. And then the last thing I want you to know is we have to send in the approval to the Department of Economic Opportunity for anything that is actually revitalized. In the past, we've done many of these. It's been very simple, but we've noticed a different viewpoint by the division these days. So I just encourage you to be in communication with your attorney and working on that long before you expire. All right, we're going to move to elections. So I did a little comparison here just to give you an overall, right? In condominium world, it's based on Florida statute, and there is a very clear timeline. 60 days before the actual election, the first notice of election has to be sent out. 40 days prior to that, the notice of intent to be a candidate must be returned. Or must be sent out. Notice of intent must be sent out. And then 35 days prior, the candidate information sheets have to be returned. And then a second notice of mailing has to be sent at the very latest 14 days prior to the election. That second notice includes the ballot, the notice, the candidate information sheet, and then the election happens. On the converse, in the HOA world, it's done according to the governing documents of the association. So it's a very different creature. Both have 60 days to dispute an election, and for $1 million, I don't have $1 million for you, but for $1 million, who would we go to if we wanted to dispute an election? Someone just dropped that in the chat. Just let's see if anyone's listening. Who would we go to? What division in Florida would we go to if we wanted to dispute an election, condos or HOAs? Anyone? DBPR! Philip Johnsey, good job. Thank you very much. I appreciate you listening, and everyone else. Okay, good job, all of you. Jason, George, or Jorge, John, Jeremy, Philip, thank you very much. Appreciate it. That is exactly where you go. Okay. So now let's switch back to HOA election only. All right. So all members of the association are eligible to serve on the board of directors, and a member may nominate themselves as a candidate for the board at a meeting where the election is to be held, provided, however, that if the election process allows candidates to be nominated in advance of the meeting, the association is not required to allow self-nominations at the meeting. An election is not required unless more candidates are nominated than vacancies exist. If an election is not required because there is either an equal number or fewer qualified candidates than vacancies exist, and if nominations from the floor are not required pursuant to this section or the bylaws, write-in nominations are not permitted, and such qualified candidates shall commence service on the board regardless of whether a quorum is attained at the annual meeting. Now, that feels simple to me, and I know it is complex. So what I would say to you is we need to determine in HOA what your process is and whether you can have self-nominations or not, and whether you do nominations in advance, and then talk to an attorney about exactly how to handle it. Except as otherwise provided in the governing documents, boards of directors must be elected by a plurality of the votes cast by eligible voters. And again, any challenge must be done within 60 days. A person who is delinquent in the payment of any fee, fine, or other monetary obligation to the association on the day that he or she could be last nominated themselves or nominated to the board may not seek election to the board, and their name shall not be listed on the ballot. A person serving as a board member who becomes more than 90 days delinquent in the payment of any fee, fine, or other monetary obligation to the association shall be deemed to have abandoned his or her seat on the board, creating a vacancy on the board to be filled according to law. And for the purposes of this paragraph, the term any fee, fine, or other monetary obligation means any delinquency to the association with respect to that parcel. A person who's been convicted of any felony in this state or in any other US state, or convicted of an offense that would be a felony in our state, may not seek election of the board and is not eligible for board membership unless their rights have been restored for at least 5 years from the date that they're seeking the election. The validity of any action by the board is not affected if it is later determined that a person eligible to seek election of the board or that a member of the board is ineligible for membership. So the bottom line is, if you find out after the fact, it's not a problem. All the board actions still fall in place and are still valid. There are a ton of new fraud penalties. So if you didn't hear, because this is not, I didn't frame this as a legal update course, but let's just say that in July 1, 2024, a whole lot of new criminal sanctions came up for both condominiums and HOAs. And that is in a response to some terrible things that happened at a very large association down in Miami called the Hammocks. So we have a lot more election fraud penalties and just general criminal penalties across the board, which is disconcerting to me as a practitioner and probably disconcerting to you as a board member. A person who engages in the following acts of fraudulent voting activity related to association elections commits a misdemeanor of the first degree and is punishable as provided in these sections. So what does that mean? Willfully or falsely swearing to or affirming an oath or affirmation, or procuring another person to falsely swear or affirm to another affirmation in connection with or arising out of voting activities. Perpetrating or attempt to perpetrate or aid in the perpetration of fraudulent fraud in casting a vote, preventing a member from voting or preventing a member from voting as they intended, or attempting to change their ballot envelope, vote, or voting certificate. Basically, bullying, right? Menacing, threatening, or using bribery or any other kind of corruption to influence, deceive, or deter a member to vote. Giving or promising indirectly anything of value, like kickbacks to get a vote, or using or threatening to use directly or indirectly any kind of force, violence, or intimidation as a tactic of coercion to compel somebody to vote or refrain from voting. So in my experience, I've never seen this, but clearly this happened in one situation, and this is why we have this new legislation. Each of the following acts constitutes a misdemeanor of the first degree, and that is knowingly aiding, abetting, or advising a person in fraudulent voting activity, agreeing, conspiring, combining, or confederating with at least one other person to commit fraudulent voting activity, and having knowledge of fraudulent voting activity related to the association elections, and giving any aid to the offender with the intent that the offender avoid or escape detection, arrest, punishment, and the like. Okay, we're going to go through condominium elections, and then I'm going to take a break because I mean, everybody should probably want to take a break, I imagine. All right, let's get through this one section, and then we'll take a quick 5-minute break. So condominium elections, as I stated, are statutory. And the first notice indicates the date and time of the meeting, the location of meeting at least 60 days prior, and any unit owner eligible to run for the board. So it makes it very clear. An owner must give written notice at least 40 days before the election, which is a self-nomination on the candidate information sheet. And they need to submit what's called a notice of intent to run. So the first notice is sent with a notice of intent to run. And then at that point, if they're not eligible because they are delinquent in assessments, different than HOA, assessments, and they've been provided notice that they're delinquent in assessments and or suspended or removed by DBPR, or they're convicted felon without full restoration of their rights, they are not eligible to run. In condominium associations with 10 or more units, co-owners serving at the same time unless they own more than one unit are not eligible candidates at the same time. So if you have two people who own two different units and they're married, they can both run. If they only own one unit, they cannot do that. Candidates in that candidate information sheet may submit personal information. It's one-sided, 8.5 by 11, and they can put their background, education, qualifications, etc. The key here is the association may not edit, alter, or modify that, and it becomes official records of the association. So in my, I will tell you I say if they submit an 8.5 by 11 and decided they wanted to draw a picture of what they think is important, then you're going to send out the picture. If you think that picture is obscene or there's a problem with it, you definitely need to get legal advice because the division is very, very clear, as well as the statute. You cannot alter or modify it. The mailing includes, on the second notice, includes a large outer envelope and a small inner envelope, and the information sheets that the candidates have sent and the notice of meeting. And what happens is the small inner envelope is where you put your ballot, and then you put that inside, which has no identifying information. You put that inside the larger outer envelope where you actually sign and identify what your unit is. And that's what's sent to the association. And then on the day of election, separated and then opened. Finally, at least 14 days prior to the election, there's a second notice with an agenda, ballot, time, and the limited proxy. And this can be mailed or electronically transmitted if the owner has consented. And the ballot should be uniform in appearance. They should have alphabetical order of surname and no indicators of incumbents, no spaces for signature lines, and no unit identification. There was a time where they would send, this is years ago, have associations send different colors to different buildings so they would know. You cannot do that. It's got to be uniform. You're going to use all blue ballots. Everybody gets blue ballots. Let me just be very, very clear about that. A quorum is not a requirement for an election. Quorum is not a requirement for election, and that probably confuses you. So let me just pause because the election is generally held with the annual meeting. So if there's going to be actions at the annual meeting needs to have a quorum. But the election itself does not require a quorum. It requires that 20% of the eligible votes must cast ballots for the election for it to be valid. It's calculated when the outer envelopes are verified against a list of qualified voters and the highest plurality wins. And then I put this in here because I think it's useful. DBPR has a condominium ombudsman that oversees the election monitor program, where 15% of the total voting interest or 6 units, whichever is greater, may petition to appoint an election monitor to attend the annual meeting of the unit owners and conduct the election of directors. All costs associated with the election monitoring process are paid by the association, and residents may email the Office of the Ombudsman at this email address if they're interested in having an election monitor. So important practical note. Just again, the eligibility is very similar to HOA as in condo, but in condominiums, it's not past due for any monetary obligation. It's for assessments only, and it's at the time when they submit their notice of intent to run. If you are convicted of a felony, etc., these are exactly the same. The third bullet point, though, is a little different. No more than 8 consecutive years unless 2/3 of the owners cast votes for that person or they're not enough eligible candidates. So there is what people like to call a term limit. I haven't seen this be very effective because 8 consecutive years and then the caveat that there's nobody else who wants to run leaves the same board in the same spot. And then the same issue with co-owners may not serve at the same time unless there are not enough eligible candidates. Now, I put this last note in here, which doesn't have to do with qualification for election, but I think it's important. To suspend the voting rights of a unit owner or a member that is delinquent in the payment of any fee or monetary obligation, so this would apply both to HOAs and condos, the association must notify the unit owner or member at least 90 days before the election that their voting rights are being suspended. So you can suspend folks' voting rights, but it must be done at least 90 days before the election. So in the world of condominiums, generally we start to think like 60 days out, that's our timeline. You need to be thinking 90 days out, which means in the world of running the business of the association, if you know an election is happening, you need to be a quarter ahead of it to be thinking about, all right, are we suspending rights to vote? And then what's our process 60 days in? You may have online voting for condominium associations, and unit owners can consent electronically or in writing. The unit owner's identity has to be authenticated through a transmission of electronic ballot, and the system must ensure secrecy. It must be confirmed that the system works at least 14 days in advance. Electronic votes that are cast count towards quorum. So it's an interesting thing, right? If you have your annual meeting and your election at the same time, which you normally do, this would then help you with quorum requirements from taking actions like special assessments, amendments, etc. The board must adopt online voting at a special meeting and must allow people to vote by traditional ballot if they wish to do so. So this is not a catch-all to change to electronic online voting. And if the board authorizes online voting, this is very key. The board must honor a unit owner's request to vote electronically at all subsequent elections unless the unit owner opts out of online voting. And you always must have additional blank ballots and inner and outer envelopes available at an election. I didn't put all of the requirements of this system because it's pretty detailed, but all of the third-party vendors, even one of my competitors, Becker, like they have Becker Vote, no problem. That meets those requirements, and you would have your attorney review that. But I think what's key here is once you do online voting, you're not going back in the world of condominiums because you have to give them the right to do it once you start. I think it's great, and I think we're going there, and I think it's wonderful. But understand from an administrative point of view, you definitely have this like bifurcation that happens where you've got, we still have to have traditional votes going out, we still have to have mailing, and you still have to have those ballots available at a meeting. Super important. And then regarding the outgoing board, an outgoing board or committee member must relinquish all official records and property of the association in their possession or under their control to the incoming board within 5 days after the election. Now, I know there's some of you out there just laughing or spitting out your coffee because that never happened, right? So what you're going to do in that situation is contact the attorney and also make a complaint to DVPR. Because wouldn't it be nice if that person was removed and not allowed to run again because they failed to give the incoming board the actual documentation? This is why you should take that step, but a lot of people don't think that through. Failure to comply with this requirement can personally subject a person to a civil penalty. Also, again, DVPR, I like the idea of going after and trying to have them not be able to run again. Destruction of any official record of a condominium association in furtherance of a crime constitutes a crime. So again, this is a very different than sort of our legal update. I'm giving you overview so you understand the topic. You will have heard it once, at least with me, maybe take another board certification and you'll know to come back. All right, I am going to pause here and laugh. I don't know if you guys remember Staples, like that was easy. All right, so we got through an hour and 20 minutes. And let's take a 5-minute break. It's 10:20. I'm going to give you to 10:25. How are you going to know? I'm going to take off my video. I'm going to take off my video and mute myself. And then at 10:25, we're going to start again. So this is your chance. Go refill your coffee, take a stretch, have a bio break, and come back, and we will get going. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
And Daniel, while we're on break, I can take a look at the chat.
Yeah, there's quite a few questions that have come in. If you do answer them individually, there's actually a button that says answer live, and then that'll record your answer for people later. So if you want to click that as you respond to them.
Let me see. Yeah, I may just do a verbal, right?
Okay, so let me know the question you're doing and I can keep track of that for you.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I see in the chat, people are saying that they can't hear anything. We're just on a 5-minute break. Give everybody a chance to get some more coffee or use the facilities. Jane's going to be returning shortly to help us all. So just please be patient with us, and we'll be getting back to the seminar momentarily.
Yep,
Oh.
it's actually 10:25, so good time, eh?
There she is. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, here's my easy button again. That was easy. Okay. It's a
Hey,
legacy.
excuse me just a second. Can we put on the caption so they can read it? Beatrice, are you still on? Whoever's on from Vinteum. Closed caption needs to be on, please. Katie, can you possibly help with that?
Hi, sorry, I'm here. I was thinking on water. Can you repeat, please?
No problem. Can you put on closed caption for those that they're saying they cannot hear her?
I think they were saying they can hear because we are not talking, but the captions, everyone that need captions can look through the bar. There's all the chat and information, and then you can see a button saying show captions, and then you can click it. I can make it open for everyone. Unfortunately, I can just open for myself, but you can all press show captions and then.
Okay, so can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, I'll do it, Beatrice. So at the bottom of everyone's Zoom, there's a navigation bar. On that navigation bar, you might see it says chat, it says raise hand, it says share, it says Q&A, and then the next one over says show captions. Everyone individually who wants captions has to click on that themselves. We can't do it globally for everyone. So look at the bottom of your navigation bar. It says show captions with a little CC, and click on that, and you will individually be able to then see the verbiage as the speakers are speaking.
Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. My internet turned off, sorry.
No problem. Beatrice, one quick question for me, just administratively. As Jane answers the questions in the Q&A, if I click the answer live, it'll then record that answer?
No, but when Jane received the Q&A, I'm almost sure that have the time, like answer to to like 5:30 to 7:40. I don't know.
Okay, so
like
it'll
the minute. I'm almost sure.
the answer.
Yeah, I'm almost 100% sure that it will be like
That
it.
is how it works. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, so welcome back, everyone. Doesn't look like we lost anyone. It looks like we added some people, which is great. Okay, couple things. One, reminder that you're at a condo and HOA board certification course. We just took a quick 5-minute break. We have a lot more to do. I'm about to do some questions, but I do want to just share. I just realized one of the things I'm going to do to improve is create a slide that I can get to anytime that has a timer, so you understand we're on a break and it's not confusion. So thanks for your feedback on that, everybody. I'm just going to go to a couple questions. I'm looking at webinar chat, Daniel, so I'm just going to answer what I just saw. In terms of the election timeline, Rebecca, it is a strict timeline. So first of all, 60 days prior, when the first notice goes out, they have to send the notice of intent to run form. If they do not, they would have to renotice the whole election. Also, ballots must go out 34 to 14 days, 14 days at a minimum is a second notice and the ballot. So that is a strict timeline and would be cause to contest the election if it was not done properly. Ezekiel, does a candidate for a board in a condominium need to be an owner? Generally, you must be an owner. However, there are governing documents that have opportunities where folks cannot be owners. So I'm not going to answer that, but you need to review your governing documents and speak to the attorney. Let me just do a couple quick. Again, if anybody has any issues with your logging in, logging off, please contact Cara at PeytonBolin.com. And again, you must be registered individually to get credit. And I'm going to keep going. All right, guys. Oh, Q&A. Let me just do Q&A. Sorry. One more thing. Q&A. All right, let's see. Okay. Wow, there's a lot more. Okay. Okay, when is the deadline for HOA board members to complete this course? It is within 90 days of being elected and or nominated to the board or appointed to the board. So it's a little different than in the condo space. You need to do this within 90 days. Is there any way to know if you're a condo and HOA? Margaret, very good question. The Declaration of Covenants and Restrictions will tell you that. It will identify it not just by the word condominium or HOA, because sometimes they will use different, that will not be in the title. You need to look at the definitions and what the declaration may be subject to in terms of the statutes. And if you cannot figure that out, it's something that an attorney certainly can help you with. What happens when you, George, what happens when you have both an HOA and a condo? Super complex question, actually, George, because many times you've got master associations that are HOAs with condominiums underneath. And not to confuse the subject, but to share with you, there's a concept called the springing condominium. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. And they'll say that's perhaps a condo instead of an HOA. But that is a very specific legal analysis, and you need to speak to an attorney about that. Paul, what takes priority? Statute, ordinance, or governing documents? Awesome. There is no priority order. And what's going to make things a little confusing is that there is a case called Kaufman that basically states that if you have language that says that your declaration is subject to the Condominium Act as amended from time to time, that changes the analysis. So what I would say to you is the whole point of me sharing that foundation of governance is that it's a legal analysis to determine if the statute controls or if your governing documents control versus a, let's call it county ordinance, okay? What's important is you know that, and you ask the question so you can determine it. I did say to you, especially we're talking about condominium elections right now, certainly the election, that controls because it's very, now people can make arguments, we're attorneys, every attorney can make an argument, but I'm going to tell you statute controls there because it's very clear that all condominium associations as a form of ownership are subject to that particular portion of the statute. HOA regarding other statutes, if topic is not specifically addressed, would other statutes, yeah, again, anonymous attendee, it's a good question. If something's not specifically addressed in the declaration, you may have a right to enforce it, but mostly you're looking at statutory enforcement, not declaratory enforcement of your declaration. So it's a question that's great, but requires fact and a legal answer, a legal analysis. In a condo, what percentage of unit owners are required to change existing rental rules? So I cannot answer that, William. What you'd be looking for is how do you amend the declaration? The amendment section of the declaration will tell you the number of owners that are required to vote for any particular amendment. And when you look at rental rules as the word you used, I don't know if it's going to be a change to the restriction or a actual rule that deals with the restriction. So again, I can't answer that fully, but the best place I can point you to first is to look at the amendment language of the declaration. Daniel, how soon before expiration should we act to preserve? If you're going to do a preservation, I would tell you, you should at least give yourselves 60 days. If we had to fast track it, we probably could, but I don't think you can do it in less than 21 days because of the 14-day notice requirement. Does the 30 years for expiration start at the original filing by the builder or when they took over? So that's a good question, Susan. That it's actually a legal analysis, but it's based on the when the declaration was filed, not on turnover. So turnover does not impact the MRTA analysis. And when it was filed is the first part of the analysis, but it absolutely requires an attorney review because there may be additional amendments, there may be changes to how the deeds were worded that would have MRTA tolling date start later. So again, it's a good thing to look at as a board just to say, hey, this is in our realm, but don't do that analysis on your own. Vicky, is the CAM management company responsible for 30-year marketable title? I've never seen, I really never seen a management contract that actually talks about MRTA as something that they're looking at. It's a legal analysis. It's not a management situation. The management might be responsible for notices, meetings, etc. But I've never seen a contract that says that they'll be responsible for checking MRTA for you. Yep. So Rebecca, I totally understand, but it's got to be 4 hours every time. So it's a 4-hour board certification pursuant to statute. And I could separate them, but I'm putting them together to actually allow a larger audience to review both HOA and condo. You still have to do the 4 hours. There's no getting around it, even if I split it out. Yes, there's going to be a recording available. Okay, I can't answer specific questions from the anonymous. I'm just going through this really quickly. If an owner is out of the country or state, can they vote by email or fax? You can only vote by electronic voting, which is required, or they have to complete their proxy and submit it. And that proxy vote can be accepted by email if identified. Okay. Let me see. All right, I'm going to pause here and keep going because there's just so much more information and we have a lot of questions. So I'm just going to pause. I'm going to close this out. It'll open me up, I think, with the delinquent fee question. Okay, great. All right, guys, let's run it out here on condo board meetings. So any gathering of the members of the board of directors at which a quorum of board members is present for the purpose of conducting association business is a board meeting. That is the same for an HOA. Okay, a board meeting is a board meeting. In a residential condominium of more than 10 units, the new law states that you must have a meeting at least once a quarter. That is a new law as of July 1, 2024. At least 4 times a year, the meeting agenda must include an opportunity for members to ask questions of the board, and adequate notice of all board meetings, which must specifically identify all agenda items, must be posted conspicuously on the condominium property at least 48 hours in advance. If applicable, the notice, agenda, and other documents required for the meeting must be posted on the association's website. So let's just say this. Quorum of board members get together. That is a meeting. It must be properly noticed. In both HOA and condo, you must have 48-hour notice in a conspicuous place with the agenda, with specifics. Unit owners have the right to speak at meetings. Oops. Now, this is interesting. Directors present at a board meeting have a duty to vote or abstain due to an asserted conflict of interest. So you're either voting or you say you have a conflict. So directors present at the meeting have 4 options. Yes, no. Stay silent, which presumes that you are agreeing to the action and means you are saying yes. This is Robert's Rules of Order and also exactly what DBPR has provided. Or you vote to abstain, and a director who abstains from voting on any action or on any corporate matter is presumed to have taken no position regarding the action. This means that the director has formally declined to vote either for or against the action and really should be for an asserted conflict of interest. What if a board member wants to be a vendor? It's prohibited for an association to employ or contract with a provider of goods and services that is owned or operated by a board member or relative unless approved by 2/3 of the majority of vote of the other board members at a board meeting. Directors and officers must disclose to, oh, I have a typo, my apologies. Directors and officers must disclose that themselves or relative is an active officer and enters into a contract for goods and services with the association that may be reasonably construed to be a conflict of interest. Now, I did not go fully into conflict of interest here. I want to say to you that there is a way to handle it. There's a specific procedure. Conflict of interest is something that can be asserted and gotten over. That is the hurdle. It does not mean immediately it was an illegal action. So just be clear about that. But do you want board members to be vendors of the association? Generally, no. I think as a best practice, it's not a good idea. So last slide on board meetings is the unit owner's perspective. Unit owners have the right to attend, which includes the right to speak on all designated agenda items. Associations may adopt written rules on governing the frequency, duration, and manner of those statements. I highly recommend you do before you have an issue. Unit owners have the right to ask questions relating to reports on the status of the construction or repair projects and the status of revenues and expenditures during the current fiscal year and other issues affecting the condominium. Unit owners may tape or record or videotape the meetings. However, DBPR may adopt reasonable rules governing the tape recording and videotaping of these meetings, which have yet to be published, and I will send those out when they do. And if 20% of the voting interest petition the board to address an item of business, the board at its next regular meeting or at a special meeting of the board, but no later than 60 days after receipt of that petition, shall place the item on the agenda at its next regular board meeting or at a special meeting called for that purpose. So let me pause here. Petitions are highly misunderstood. There are two places in the statutes where you can use a petition. It is for this purpose, to have the board address an item, meaning put it on the agenda, and for recall. So there, and it's a specific petition for recall that's done in a specific way. But just petitioning the board, spending a lot of time to petition them to not hire a management company or not take a certain action is pretty fruitless and doesn't have to have action taken. And I would also note on this particular last fourth point, this means the board is going to add an item to the agenda. It does not mean they're taking any particular action. It doesn't mean they're going to approve or disapprove or say yes or no. They're going to add it to the agenda. And maybe it's 20% of the voting interest want to talk to the board about a new landscaping company. They put on the agenda, we're going to discuss new landscaping company. They put on the agenda, they bring it up. Does any board member have anything to say about it? No, we have nothing to say about it. They've met the qualifications of this portion of the statute, and they're not required to take any action. So that's important for both owners to understand and board members to understand. Okay, we're going to move on to record keeping and maintenance. All right, a new requirement for this course. So, association is a not-for-profit business. Businesses have records. Many of us think about records like things that we need to keep for the IRS, which are useful, but there are official records of the association. So in a condominium, records must be made available within 45 miles of the community and within 10 working days after a written request is received. Written request. That means any request. That could be an email. I would tell you if people receive text requests, I say, we're going to call that a written request right now. That's our interpretation. The idea is unit owners have the right to see records, and you don't want to play games with this wasn't given us the way we wanted it. Now in an HOA, it's by certain certified written request, a little different. So both for condo and HOA, no specific purpose is required for the request. They do not have to tell you why. They may use portable technology to scan or copy records at no charge. And there is a penalty after the 10-day limit of $50 per day that may apply, up to $500, right? But this fine is not automatic. So if somebody sends in their assessment and says, you didn't respond to my records request, minus $500, they're in a tough situation because they actually haven't paid their assessment. So I'm just making it clear to you that's not automatic. They actually need to sue and win to get that fine. Or the division has to grant them that fine. Practical pointer is to create rules and regulations to address records requests. So we do have associations that allow for one records request a month. They make it clear that records requests are available Tuesday through Thursday from 9 to 3 at this location. And they do that in advance, which makes things a little easier. So official records include a whole lot of things. Developer provided items, the condo declaration amendments, and that would include HOA declaration amendments, bylaws, articles of incorporation, rules, meeting minutes, unit owner rosters, insurance policies, management lease or other contracts, bills, sales, accounting records, ballots, proxies, and voting records, which need to be kept for at least 1 year, all official records for at least 7 years, rental records if they're acting as an agent, Q&A reports if you're a condominium, inspection reports, SIRS, milestone, which is a 15-year retention, bids on any materials, equipment, or other services, affirmative acknowledgements, and other association-related written records. Anything that's an expenditure, all permits, and you must have a checklist and a good faith obligation to recover records, which I'll go into in a second. So there is a kitchen sink here, which is number 18, all other association related written records. So it's very important that you understand record keeping is key. And generally, if you are not self-managed, you provide the authority for your management company to handle this for you, which is great. But I'm going to tell you, if you're the secretary of the association, you want to take a look at how are those records being maintained? How do we access them? And what are our rules and regulations around official records requests? So website requirements, because we talk about records. Currently in condominiums, 150 units or more must have a website as of January 1, 2026. Condos with 25 units or more must have a website or application on a mobile device to keep records. And for HOAs, 100 or more parcels require a website. Some more record keeping and maintenance for condominiums only. And this is a new portion of the July 1, 2024 legislation. Email address and fax numbers of unit owners are only accessible to other unit owners if consent to receive notice by electronic transmission is provided, or if the unit owner expressly indicated that personal information can be shared with other unit owners. That's the email and the fax numbers. The association is prohibited from selling or sharing email addresses and fax numbers to outside third parties. If such information is included in documents released to a third party, the association must redact that information before the document is disseminated. And the association is only liable for if disclosure of email addresses or fax numbers was made with a knowing or intentional disregard of the protected nature of this information. So bottom line, you got to protect email and fax. Cannot just give it out, must consent. And that's the only way it's accessible is if unit owners opted in to receive notice by electronic transmission, then that can be sent out, which is a bit of a slippery slope. Because the reality is these days, everybody uses email, right? To send out the mass emails to coalesce people together, etc. Okay. The new records requirement, and I've already said this prior when I talked about official records generally, is they must maintain all invoices, transaction receipts, or deposit slips that substantiate any receipt or expenditure of funds by the association since the inception of the association. So you may be thinking, we don't have that. Of course you don't, because this is a new records requirement, but you have a good faith obligation. I'll explain that. The association must maintain a copy of all building permits and copies of completed board member educational certificates, right? This is an official records. And then I call this being amenable, but official records must be maintained in an organized manner that facilitates inspection of the records by the unit owners. So in a manner that facilitates inspection, in the past, we would say you have a right to inspect records, and sometimes you'd be welcomed into a warehouse with 500 boxes and you're said, yeah, your records are in here, good luck. And the statute has changed to basically say you have to organize them in a way that at least they can facilitate the inspection. There's going to be a lot of interpretation about what this means. We don't have any case law or anything around it yet, but I think it's important that you're just looking at, like, let's in good faith make sure that's available. Also in good faith, you need to comply. So I'm actually super happy about this change because it's made me crazy that we ask for records that I know can be retrieved, like bank statements, deposit slips, checks, because we know the banking institutions have them, and we're told we don't have them because they got, the last board member kept them, or they burned up in a fire, they got wet in a flood, but you can always get them. So be very clear, you have to comply. If the official records of the association are lost, destroyed, or otherwise unavailable, the association has a good faith obligation to obtain and recover those records as is reasonably possible. So again, a lot of interpretation about what's reasonable, but I'll tell you my example right there. We all know that the banks have the records. There's no reason an association cannot get bank records. All right. The association may respond to an official records request by directing a person to the website or application that has the information. And the owner is now entitled to a checklist of records that was made available for inspection and copying. And the checklist must identify any of the records that were not made available to the requester, and you must maintain this checklist for at least 7 years. So what's happened is I think there's been a lot of abuse of how official records have worked both ways, right? Like both folks needlessly and constantly asking for records. And then in this case, associations just saying, yeah, here you go, too bad, and not identifying what's not available, making you figure it out. So this checklist, it's definitely a burden on the association, but you keep a copy of it. And considering that there are a lot of criminal sanctions now around the destruction of official records, I think it's a good safeguard. And here's the criminal liability in regards to records. So a director or manager who knowingly, willfully, and repeatedly destroys or refuses to release official records or accounting records is subject to criminal liability. And repeatedly means 2 or more violations in a 12-month period. Any person who engages in such activity must be removed from office and a vacancy must be declared. Now, they don't tell you how to do that, but if you feel like that's happening, you need to talk to your association attorney and determine the next course of action. This is a felony of the 3rd degree to willfully and knowingly refuse to release or otherwise produce association records with the intent to avoid or escape detection, arrest, trial, or punishment for the commission of a crime, or to assist another person with such avoidance or escape. Note, if the division may request access, the division may request access to the association's website or mobile application to investigate if they receive a complaint. So division has a lot more power, and they can get involved and they can start to look at the business of the association. If they get a complaint, I think the best thing to do is to make sure that you respond within 10 days and you provide that checklist and you make it clear what's being given and what's not being given. Now, in the world of HOA record keeping and maintenance, similar and dissimilar, not quite as much regulation. So official records of the association may be maintained for at least 7 years unless your governing documents require a longer period. Associations must adopt a document retention policy. So this is different than in a condo, setting forth the method or policy by which the official records of the association are to be maintained and the time period such records would be retained. So this new policy must be made available to the parcel owners on the association's website or application if the association is required to maintain a website. So official records requests are now limited to requests from parcel owners only. I would argue that's always been the case, but they made it clear. So this document retention policy, if you're in an HOA, should be probably something you should write down and discuss. Many clients are overlooking this, and they're going to overlook it until somebody says there's a violation because you don't have it. So it's a good idea starting the new year to say, hey, let's put this on our agenda and let's adopt a document retention policy. Now, very distinct in an HOA is this new thing called an accounting request. So an association parcel owners may make a written request for a detailed accounting of any amounts owed to the association. Okay, now just pause. In condo and HOA world, any owner can make a request, a written inquiry, and the association still need to respond. But this is about an accounting of amounts owed to the association in an HOA. If the association fails to provide the accounting within 15 days of the written request, any outstanding fines of the requester are waived if the fine is more than 30 days past due and the association did not give prior written notice of the fines. Parcel owners may not request another detailed accounting within 90 days of request. So the best I can tell you is the legislative intent here was to look at the fact that, different than a condominium, someone who is past due on any monetary obligation is not eligible for the board, right? After 90 days, we talked about that. So this is more around the fines in an HOA and how that impacts the ability of that owner to participate. And so I think when you look at this, and we're going to talk about the levying of fines as a section here upcoming, fines have been used or weaponized, I think is how the legislature believed, especially based on the case I told you about down in Miami. And so this is a way to say, hey, unit owners have a right to ask for that, but they also can't abuse the system and ask for it all the time, right? So I think that makes pretty good sense. We'll see how it works in practice. And then we'd already talked about 100 parcels or more must post on a website for HOAs. And these are the items that must be included. Again, a lot of what you've already heard: articles, bylaws, rules, declaration, contracts, bids, annual budget, financial report, insurance policies, certificates for directors, which would be from this course, contracts, conflict of interest documents, which I'm going to get into, and then notices of meetings of members, notices of board meetings, and protected pages inaccessible to the general public. So now conflict of interest, these are new. Okay, so this is not the conflict of interest I talked about with like someone from a condominium wanting to provide a service as a board member. So this conflict of interest has to do with new laws that came in, and I actually added them to the end of this presentation if we have time, to show you what changed in 468, which is the Community Association Management Statute. But the conflicts considered in this section are conflicts between the association and the property manager that has a financial interest and was required to disclose that interest, and contracts between the association and a director in which the director is financially interested and was required to disclose. So both, but particularly this was added after 468 was changed this year. Okay, wrong direction. Let me go, there we go. Okay. Website requirements for an HOA must be accessible through the internet and include a separate section that's only accessible by parcel owners and employees of the association. Upon written request by an owner, the association must provide the owner with a username, password, and access. And the association must ensure that the records and information that is statutorily inaccessible to members or parcel owners are not posted on the website. So you may be asking yourself, what would statutorily inaccessible to members be? Your background checks, your applications to rent, your applications to purchase. And you really, if someone's asking for that specific information, you should be talking to your attorney anyways, because they're probably looking to formulate a lawsuit against the association. So you definitely want to check that and make sure it gets redacted properly. Okay. If protected information is included in documents that are posted, the association has to ensure that's redacted. I just said that. The association is not liable for disclosing protected or restricted information unless the disclosure is made with a knowing or intentional disregard of protected or restricted nature of that information, right? So if like you're knowingly just like, yeah, sure, let me give you the license and the bank statements of this person who just submitted an application because it's malicious intent. Notices of any scheduled member or board meeting and agenda for such meetings have to be posted in plain view on the homepage of the website or your mobile application, or on a separate subpage of the website labeled notices, conspicuously visible and linked from the homepage. For membership meetings, the association is required to post on its website or the application any document to be considered on the meeting agenda for at least 7 days before the meeting at which the document or information is going to be considered. Whoa, that's a major change. Usually it's just the agenda itself. So there are, as I've said, criminal sanctions to keep in mind. So a member of the board, association or manager who knowingly and willfully repeatedly violates the rights with the intent of causing harm to the association or one more of its members commits a misdemeanor of the second degree. Again, this is 2 or more violations with the same 12-month period. And if you knowingly and intentionally deface or destroy accounting records during the period in which an accounting records are required to be maintained, or knowingly or intentionally fail to create or maintain those records with an intent of causing harm to the association or one or more of its members, you've committed a misdemeanor of the first degree. So the reality is definitely people have used ledgers and past due maintenance to create a hard time for people individually and unnecessarily. Any person who willfully and knowingly refuses to release or otherwise produce documents with the intent to avoid escape detection or otherwise commit a crime, it's a felony of the third degree. If association receives a subpoena for records from law enforcement agency, they're required to comply within 5 days of that subpoena. What's ironic and funny about this is you've always had to respond to a subpoena. This was literally because in the hammocks, the association refused to respond to law enforcement subpoenas. So they put this in the statute, which is, I mean, not funny, but it's just, it's so specific. And the reality is subpoena is an enforceable document. There's an affirmative obligation on the part of the association to assist a law enforcement agency in its investigation to the extent permitted by law. Again, cannot stonewall the police who are investigating something or the state. Okay. How long must you keep the certificate in the official records? Since we've talked a lot about official records. The irony is the certificate lasts, right? 4 years and 7 years, as we talked about, but you must keep the certificate in the official records for 5 years. So just wrap your head around that. They're all different numbers, but that is the change. Okay. All right, we are getting into financial transparency and literacy. So I'm going to pause again before we go there. And I'm going to take a look at the chat.
Jane, if you wouldn't mind, just so I can get it properly, can you just tell me the time, excuse me, the time stamp of the question you're answering so I can just catch up to you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to start right now. So I opened the chat, not the Q&A. Let me start with that, Daniel, okay?
Yep.
Um,
Jane, I've been asking everyone to put their questions in the Q&A so it'd make it a little bit easier for all.
Okay, great. There's only one question here, so I'll just use that one, 10:57 a.m. Are meeting agenda backup documents required for condos as well as HOAs? So it's a great question. We just went over what was required in the HOA. In the condominium statute, there's a requirement now that you have contracts, but that particular requirement is inside of the regular and special assessment meeting notice. So there is some discord between attorneys. The conservative approach is to say all contracts should be attached to the agenda. And then the statutory interpretation approach is to say that portion was only put in for regular and special assessment meetings. So you should speak to your attorney and you should follow their advice. We do have differing opinions, especially because much of this is up to interpretation. Fun question. All right, I'm going to go to Q&A. Here we go. All right. So 10:08, Meryl. Does the delinquent fee to run for the board the same under 718? So 718, you must be delinquent in assessments, and under 720, it's delinquent for any monetary obligation to the association. 10:09, there's a couple of them. Nancy, can an owner in our condo association still run for the board when they file for bankruptcy? Yes, bankruptcy does not make you ineligible. Either an active bankruptcy or an old bankruptcy does not make you ineligible. A bankruptcy is not a felony. 10:09, in a condominium, we cannot get a quorum in any annual meeting. What can we do? Yeah, so again, if you're using the annual meeting to have an election, you don't need a quorum. But if you can't get a quorum together for an annual meeting or a special meeting of members to make a vote, I would talk to your attorney, because you may be able to do a ballot that has both a limited proxy for quorum purposes and the ballot itself when you're voting on things like amendments and special assessments. Frank, I cannot split the slides. They're going to come out all as one because this is a joint class. But I will take under consideration doing just one or the other separately in the future. Do fraud penalties apply to condo elections? Yes, they do. 10:10. 10:16. Okay, 10:16. We only have 12 units in our condo. Getting more than 4 people to show up for a meeting is difficult. What if no one votes when we hold elections? Well, if nobody nominates themselves to run, then the previous board is going to roll over. And if nobody votes at all, like you do the election, there's no votes, your previous board's going to roll over. In that 12-unit condo, I think that's a real important conversation with all of your members, because you are a business. And I mean, at least in my world, the home I own is my biggest asset. When a 10:17, when a member resigns, can the board reappoint a previously defeated member? Sure. The board can appoint any member that is eligible. So just because you were defeated doesn't mean you can't be appointed at that point. 10:18, what happens if you don't notify 90 days prior to the election? If you are suspending someone's right to vote and you don't notify them 90 days prior to the election, then that person can vote, Richard. Doesn't mean that, the association may try not to have you vote, but you'd have a reason to contest the election. Okay, hold on. Let me. Is there a state fee for resigning from the board? 10:18. There's a change of not change of registration. There's a change of officers and directors, and the division of corporations may have a fee like $35 to make that change. But if you, yeah, so there may be a fee. I don't know it off the top of my head. You'd have to check with the Division of Corporations. So 1020, can you suspend voting rights if the unit owner contests the money owed? I'm not talking about assessments. Well, then you'd be talking about, you could suspend their, yes. So if they're contesting that, you need to speak to an attorney because it would be very tricky. And I can't give you legal advice on that. It's like actually quite specific if there's not a clear answer. So John, 1020, you're going to need to talk to an attorney about that one. Okay, let's keep going. 1021, what if a board voted for online voting during a monthly meeting instead of a special meeting as mentioned? I'd have to take a look at how that was actually noticed. So I think you need to ask for legal advice to be sure. Anonymous. 1022, what happens when no one or not enough individuals volunteer to serve as the board? How's the business of the HOA completed? Frank, the reality is this. I mean, I have also seen, 3-person boards where just one person is handling the whole thing. It's never a problem until there's an estoppel that isn't done correctly or there's a complaint that's filed. The bottom line is everyone has to understand when you purchase in a community association, common interest community association, condominium HOA, it doesn't mean you're just off to the races. You have an obligation and you have rights and restrictions, and no doubt about it, you need to be involved. So it's almost like you need to campaign a little bit to inform people. Okay, let's see. Linda Blakeman, you need to contact Cara at PeytonBolin to make sure that gets scheduled. 1023. How often does the milestone inspection report have to be done for a condo? 10 years. Do you need to be an owner to be on the board? You generally do need to be an owner. However, there are governing documents that are different. 1024. So you'll need to check. 1024 again. If the director serves 9 months on the board and resigns for personal reasons, can he run for the president? Yes, anyone who resigns can certainly have the right to run again. It doesn't impact your eligibility. For everybody, 1027 certifications will be sent via email. Let's see. 8 years of March, can they run again? Howard, I can't answer that. It requires me to identify and look at your specific situation, but I'm trying to get through a bunch, so I'm not going to answer that right now, but it's something I would ask an attorney to take a look at because there's a timing issue. What is the likelihood this new education will change? Yeah, Jorge, 1030, I do not know if these will change in 2025. I actually don't think the education requirements themselves are on the chopping block. So I think it's other things are going to be looked at by the legislature, but not particularly this. Oh yeah, anonymous Sky 1030. Oh yeah, sure. Let's talk about CTA really quick, which we haven't talked about at all, but I'll just say it. So it's funny, I just did a little video I'm going to send out later to our list, and you may get a copy of it too. So the Corporate Transparency Act deadline is passed. It was a new law passed by Congress that required beneficial owner information to be submitted for anyone who owned a business. And that they included associations. CAI, Community Association Institute, filed a lawsuit to seek an injunction. There's been many other injunctions filed by other small business organizations. We've had an injunction, and then we've had it be lifted, and then we've had the stay be lifted again, and then we have another stay on the stay. So here's the bottom line. Most of Florida, with the exception of some 9 counties, has a 6-month extension to file based on Hurricane Helene and Milton under FEMA. So right now, I'm going to tell you, I would sit and wait. However, there are some hefty penalties. So this really depends on your own personal preference. I don't want to give the government a copy of my driver's license and all of my information again, if not necessary. Some people may say, let's just do it because we don't know what the next board's going to do. But right now we have a stay on the stay on the stay, and we're in a stay. So we have a stay until we hear further, and you've got a 6-month extension for almost all counties in the state of Florida. Is it a requirement? 1031 for all board members to be primarily English speakers. I have never seen that as a requirement. It is not statutorily a requirement. 1032, For staggering terms, HOA board serving 1 year, 4-year training, 90 days seems excessive. Yeah, 100% seems super excessive. I agree. But what they're trying to do is, I think that this is the legislature's response to understanding that this is a business, an association, and that has real consequences to life safety. Unfortunately, because of Surfside, we all got that big wake-up call. And that's why they're just trying to educate more and more and more. And then, you know, add on the hammock situation in Miami-Dade, and the legislature wants to have people as educated as possible. Clarification on violation committees. I'm about to talk about committees and violation committees. So Sky 1032, this is coming attractions after financial literacy. Do all condominiums need to conspicuously post on their site their agenda, even if they email it or post it on the website? 1033, Richard DeLuca. Yeah, you still need to conspicuously post it, and it needs to go on the website. If people have said they would receive it by email, that would be sufficient, but I would be very careful not to conspicuously post on the grounds. Anonymous attendee at 1033 regarding SIRS and milestone. The number of units does not matter. The number of the stories matters. So it's 3 stories or more. And there may be an exception for a townhome community, but you are going to need to speak to an attorney because that may or may not apply based on your county as well. So you need to check. 1033, if management fails to send out the information on the candidates with the ballots, does this give? Yes, absolutely. If the candidate information sheets are not sent with the ballots in the second mailing, it is absolutely a reason to dispute the election. And everybody knows who to do that with, which is DVPR. What happens if, all right, I'm gonna do 2 more and then I gotta pause and keep going. What happens if you have more than 4 meetings a year, but there's not 1 meeting every quarter? That's a good question, John. It's required. We'd have to see how this is interpreted by the division. I think in good faith, if you're doing that, but I think the idea was for, if you think about legislative intent, it was meant to have regular meetings to keep owners abreast of what's happening as things are going on versus 4 meetings in December. What kind of rules and procedures should be discussed and approved at a public notice meeting, not by the board? Okay, I'm gonna answer this one, then I'm gonna pause. 1036. What kind of rules and procedures should be discussed and approved by public notice meeting, not by board? All right, so first of all, the board creates rules and regulations. And there are times when you need unit owner approval, but very few and far between. The notice requirement changes in condominiums from 48 hours to 14 days, depending on the specific kind of rule. But I think the most important answer here is that it is up to the board to draft and create the rules and regulations, obviously with legal input, to be sure that they have the right to enforce those things and that they're coming from a right of restriction in the declaration. Whew, okay, I'm going to pause on that. We're going to go back to the course. All right, guys. There's a whole lot of information. I added a bunch of slides at the end that we may not get to, so that's okay, but I want to get through what's required pursuant to the division and pursuant to what's required, to their specifications on the course. So financial transparency and literacy. What we're going to be talking about is annual reporting requirements and reserves again, your favorite topic. Okay. So I try to do this. I know the people who are frustrated, this is, I'm trying to show you comparisons where I can. But again, there's usefulness for all of it. So annual reporting requirements in condominiums, the annual financial report is due within 90 days after the end of the fiscal year. It has to be mailed or hand delivered to unit owners within 21 days of completion, and no later than 120 days, the report must be completed. So the first thing you need to know is, when is your fiscal year, right? So it's not necessarily a calendar year. Your fiscal year could be July 1 to June 30. So just be clear what your fiscal year is. Generally, it's the calendar year in associations, which would mean it is January 6th now. You have 90 days after the end of this fiscal year, which is conveniently during tax time, or as we're getting into tax time, to have your annual report done. In the HOA world, same thing. Look, it's exactly the same. So you can see that it is the same annual reporting requirement. Now, let me be very clear. Annual report is not filing taxes. Annual report is not your budget. It is a reporting requirement. Now, where does it come from? It's based on the total annual revenues plus reserves. So from 150,000 to 300,000, you must have what's called compiled financial statements. Generally can be done by just a bookkeeping firm and or a management company. But once you get to 300,000 to 500,000, which is reviewed financial statements, or $500,000 more, which is audited financial statements, those really need to be done by a CPA. Less than 150,000, you can do what's called a report of cash receipts and expenditures, which is almost like a general ledger, very simple. Same thing in the HOA world. However, associations with at least 1,000 parcels must prepare audited financial statements, regardless of the association's total annual revenue. Change in the law. Now, there is some flexibility. So associations may prepare different financial reports with unit owner approval. Approval must occur before the fiscal year end and is effective only for the current or following fiscal year. And if you have a developer, the developer pays for audits or reviews before turning over control. Division intervention, again, the Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes has a lot more authority now. So unit owners may notify the division if they don't receive financial reports within 5 days after requesting them. And the division will notify the association, which must comply or face consequences. And what consequences are is monetary fines. Okay, so that's financial reporting. Just again, one more time, you have to file your taxes. You have to create a budget. We've talked a lot about CSRS reserves because of condominiums in the beginning of this course. And this annual reporting requirement is separate and distinct and must be done. And so be sure that you have this on your radar, because most of you have calendar years as a fiscal year. Okay, so condominium and HOA budgets. Associations must prepare an annual budget which shows the estimated revenues and expenses for the upcoming year. So in the most basic sense, that's what a budget is. Revenues and expenses, what they were last year, what we believe they're going to be this year. An annual budget is the board's formal written plan of the association's future revenues and expenses, which must include fully funded reserves if you're a condominium, and the option to waive or partially fund reserves that are not CSRS. So again, let me just pause here. And I say this later on the slides, but I'm going to say this. In an HOA, you're not going to fund reserves unless the developer created reserves and or unit owners have chosen to vote in reserves. In the condominium world, be very clear, you've always had to fully fund reserves. There's all this talk about this is all new. No, you've always had to fully fund all reserves. You always have the right to partially fund them or waive them, okay? Which is the flexibility. What you have now is an additional component to reserves called CSRS, Structural Integrity Reserve Study Reserves, which are those components A through G, and those must be fully funded. And if you didn't waive them last year, then this year's budget must have fully funded CSRS reserves, no exception. Just saying it one more time. Budgets. So what are estimated revenues? Their assessments, interests, lease, lease or rent from owners or other income. And estimated expenses are division fees, which you may pay $4 per unit per door if you're a condominium. There are not division fees yet for an HOA, but I bet that's coming. Insurance, cost of operations, including administration, management, maintenance, rent for recreational facilities, taxes, security, and other costs. So pretty basic, but important to be clear about. For an HOA, the budget also needs to include the estimated surplus or deficit at the end of the current year. Surplus or deficit has to be itemized and clear. For a condominium budget, the board must adopt the annual budget at least 14 days prior to the start of the association's fiscal year. So if there was an issue, like if you haven't done it, do not fret. What I'm going to tell you, our advice is always just to get into action, but you do need to think about that in terms of planning because budget meetings require notice. So what is a capital expenditure? Capital expenditures are defined as the purchase or replacement of an asset whose life is greater than 1 year, or an addition to an existing asset to extend its life for a period greater than 1 year. So capital expenditures are not things, they're generally things you're contemplating with reserves. But in HOAs, you may not have reserves, but you may have capital expenditures you're contemplating, and you would add those to your budget. So how does the board handle interest for accounts of the association? So interest must remain in reserve accounts. So if you have reserves, you must keep the interest in the reserve account. The association may establish a policy regarding allocation of interest among reserve accounts, but they must remain in the reserve. So you can't say our reserve accounts make us a little bit of money, we're going to drop it over here into operating. No. But you can't allocate it between your reserve accounts, because imagine now that even HOA folks have heard about the extraordinary expenses that may come with SERS, you're going to have a lot of money in the bank. So the point is, keep it there. What about commingling of funds? Is it allowed? So what do I mean? So what I mean by commingling of funds is this. So you make one payment to the association, assuming you have reserves, HOA or condo. You make one payment. You don't make two payments. You don't say, here's my operating, here's my reserves. You make one payment. So that's a commingling. So it's actually not allowed, but commingling is when, and so the definition is commingling is when funds are collected from owners, but the reserve portion of such assessment must be moved to the reserve account within 30 days. So it's a practical thing. We don't need you to make two payments. You can make one payment, but administratively, we must move that money over within 30 days of the receipt. A transfer is required to avoid using reserve funds for unintended purposes. So I'm going to pause there really quick. And I think I say this again later. Reserve funds may only be used for the purpose that they're intended, period. End of story. And I know I got a slide on single and line item, but I just want to make that very clear. And so if you don't do that transfer, you will have commingled the funds and start to use reserve funds for a purpose that they were not reserved for. What about inflation? Inflation adjustments. Inflation adjustment for reserve assessments may be annually adjusted to take into account an inflation adjustment and any changes in estimates or extension of the useful life of the reserve item caused by deferred maintenance. Very few people ask me about this, but I thought it was important to put in here because I have a couple folks who, very few, but have asked me about this in the past. How do we handle the budget meeting? So like just practically speaking, once a proposed budget has been prepared, associations should schedule their annual budget meeting. And it must be mailed, delivered, or electronically transmitted if they have opted in to all unit owners no less than 14 days prior to the meeting. Again, reminder, you need to do this at least 14 days in advance of your fiscal year if you're a condo, which is what 3 slides ago said. The notice should include a copy of the proposed budget and the reserve schedule that is fully funded if you're a condominium. And an affidavit must be obtained to reflect when the notice and all of its components were provided to the owners. So you have to be sure this is done properly, it's sent out, and you have an affidavit of mailing. So let me pause on that. Affidavit of mailing is a one-page affidavit that if you are self-managed, you will complete, and if you are a management company, you will complete, that basically states, here is an attachment of all the unit owner addresses, here is an attachment of what was sent, and it was sent on this day, and I swear to that oath, like just like that. As an aside, this affidavit of mailing is now required when you send out a late notice and before you send it to either an attorney or collection agency for collections. So it's something that everyone in the administrative side of associations should understand sort of ubiquitously that a affidavit of mailing is a good way to be sure that you have sent something in the proper statutory timeframe. So how do we handle a vote to waive or reduce non-SERS reserves? So you can do that. It's a majority vote of the total voting interest. The results of the votes are only good for 1 year. You cannot roll that over. And if you're waiving or reducing reserves, the limited proxy must have the text on the next slide in very large language. And note the letters must be in bigger and darker font than anything else on the proxy. So this is what has to be on the proxy. And let's just be very clear, right? Waiving of reserves in whole or in part, or allowing alternative uses of existing reserves may result in the unit owner liability for payment of unanticipated special assessments regarding those items. So that waiver is required. What happens if the condominium is considered uninhabitable due to a storm? Well, if the local building official determines that the entire condo building is uninhabitable due to a natural emergency, and in our case, that's generally hurricanes, the board, upon approval of a majority of its members, of the board members, incidentally, may pause the contribution to its reserves or reduce reserve funding until the local building official determines that the condominium building is habitable. And any reserve account funds held by the association may be expended pursuant to board determination to make the condominium building and its structure habitable. Now, this might seem foreign to you, but if you are in Hillsborough, Pasco, in the Tampa Bay area, this was used very recently to deal with uninhabitable building. So it allows you to pause those reserves and then use reserves in any form that you need to, because why? You cannot use reserves for an unintended purpose unless you get a vote of the owners, unless it is an uninhabitable due to a storm. Okay, let's switch gears. HOA budgets. I've said it before, reserves must be established by the developer, or owners must vote by a majority to establish them. If they are established, the amount to be reserved in any account is based on, and this is a formula, the remaining useful life and estimated replacement cost or deferred maintenance expense of each reserve item. You heard that earlier in this presentation. If reserves have not been established and the association is responsible for capital improvements, right, which are, we talked about this 5 slides ago, something that has more than 1 year of useful life and or needs to be improved in order to keep its useful life, that may result in a special assessment. Each financial report must contain the following conspicuous language. And again, this is in all bold and all caps, because that's actually how it has to go. So the budget of the association does not provide for fully funded reserve accounts for capital expenditures and deferred maintenance that may result in a special assessment regarding those items. Owners may elect to provide for fully funded reserves under 723-3036 upon obtaining the approval of the majority of total voting interest of the association by a vote of the members at a meeting or by written consent. So that is the option. If the budget does provide for funding of accounts of deferred expenditures, but reserve accounts have not been established, then the disclaimer is slightly different. I'm not going to read it out. Slightly different. Again, you're going to get these slides. So overall, let's talk about this. For both condominium and HOA budgets, there are what's called pooled and straight line item. Pooled reserves is a combination of reserve assets in one account of multiple reserve items. So it's exactly what it says. It's a pooled reserve. In a straight line reserve, the money collected for each asset can only be used towards that named reserve item. So in other words, it's not permissible to use money collected for one reserve item for another if it is straight line. Any use of reserves, again, unless it's the intended use, requires a vote of the owner. So many people prefer the pooled method, but straight line makes it very clear. You have a lot more flexibility with pooled. I am not a CPA. I am not a financial planner. I allow those professionals to give you advice on this, but I want you to know what the difference is. All right, let's talk about debit cards. So an association and its officers, directors, employees, and agents may not use a debit card issued in the name of the association or billed directly to the association for payment of association expenses. This is pretty wise. A person who uses a debit card issued in the name of the association or billed directly to the association for any expense that is not a lawful obligation association is deemed to have committed a theft. Again, more criminal penalties for us to consider. So the term lawful obligation means an obligation that has been properly pre-approved by the board and is reflected in the meeting minutes or the written budget. So in this day and age, it is unnecessary to have a debit card. I think my point of view is don't use them at all. But if you absolutely have to have it and you know there's specific instances where it's going to be used, be very clear it must be pre-approved at a board meeting and reflected in the meeting minutes. If it is not, even if it is not malicious and if it's not a crime, can someone file a complaint against you and the association? You bet. So don't do it. All right, I'm going to pause there. That's pretty cool. And let's do some questions And let's see where we're at. All right, let me go to Q&A. Dan, you back on with me?
I'm here with you, Jane. The questions have definitely been piling up. A lot of the questions you're answering now, like in that 10:30 window, reflect questions from quite a few slides ago. So you might want to jump forward slightly if you want more questions
Okay.
to the current
Let
topic.
me just do it. Coral, let me just do it. I'm going to take where I was. I'm going to do a quick review. I'm just going to answer these things really quickly. 1039, conflict of interest does apply to HOAs. What's the minimum number of board members? That depends on your governing documents, but generally under 617, you can have no less than 3 board members. If you have less than 3 board members, you can have a receiver appointed by an angry unit owner who wants to go after the association. Okay, I can't answer that question. Yes, presidents can vote. Marilyn Miller, 1042. I'm just going to answer this. Yes, HOA, both HOA and condo meetings can be recorded and posted. Unit owners have the right to record them. You pay fines, microcardi, to your association, however that is, if it's through their management or not, but you pay the fine to the association, not to an individual, just FYI. You cannot patty crumb 1043, just have a meeting via Zoom unless you amend your bylaws and or articles of incorporation to allow for only electronic. Right now, there is a requirement that you have a physical location. Can a board, I'm going to keep going. Hold on. I'm looking. I see your point. These are way back. I'm going to keep going. Let's see here. Let me move forward.
Oh, just give me a name and a timestamp, but I'm just stamping them with your answers. So when people get the recording, they'll have where you answered.
Let me see. I'm trying to move ahead so I can get, okay. 1046, are all board meetings required to be public and available to owners? A board wants to have a brainstorming without making decisions. If you're getting together to discuss board business, that's definitely still considered a board meeting, and you need to be open to the public, meaning your association. Can 1047, Barry Milberg, can official records be kept in digital form? Yes. And pursuant to what we talked about earlier, you can answer an official records request by pointing them to the website. 1047, Deborah Black, there's a list both on the slide that we went over and in the statute of what has to be on the websites, both for condos and HOAs. 1048, just one more time, Florida statutes do not necessarily supersede association governing documents. It's a legal analysis, and you'll need to determine that with an attorney. I think I've answered. Some of these are duplicative, so I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. How does this policy affect the requirement for potential owners to get the financial 3 days of submitting a purchase agreement? 1053, Mark Jennings. So how does the policy affect the requirement for potential owners to get financial reports within 3 days of submitting a purchase agreement for a home within an HOA? The owner themselves has the obligation to get the requirements to meet the purchase agreement. So it is up to the owner to get that information, and you could use official records requests. And incidentally, we do a lot of real estate transactions as well here, and I've never seen a problem with that, but the policy is about the owner's opportunity to either inspect records or have financial reports. But in this case, when you're talking about a real estate transaction, it is the owner themselves who's responsible. What Charles Webster 1056, should a condo association adopt a records retention policy? Absolutely, Charles. You could, I mean, I think it's a good idea. They created it for HOAs. Why not do that for condominiums? I think absolutely that could be the case. I think the reason they didn't put that in the statute is just because it's a bit more specific in the condo side, 718 official records. Let's see, 1056, when it comes to financial requests, how much information has to be disclosed in terms of the unit owner information amount, especially delinquency? Doesn't it get dicey in terms of airing dirty laundry in the realm of delinquency? So 1056, when it comes to Yeah, so a unit owner can request all of the past due ledgers of everyone in the association. The association will be required to give that along with accounts receivable from owners. It's if you are maliciously putting forth people who are past due or otherwise identifying them as delinquents, that's when you get into an issue, not with the statute, but with the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. And so I would say to you, under the statute, we have an opportunity to give owners the right to inspect those records and speak to your attorney directly with any additional questions, but they can absolutely see them. I'm just going to say anonymous attendee 11 a.m. I see many issues like this, what you put up for the past 5 years. My association didn't follow any rules. There was a change of president. No owners knew why. Previous handover of official records. All these issues. I understand that. And I will tell you that you have to deal with what's happening in the current and make sure you're filing the proper complaint, doing the proper written inquiry, or requesting records now. Many owners call me very frustrated because things have built up over time, but there's no way for any attorney to just take a frustration over time and do anything with it. We do not represent individual unit owners anymore. I will give you a referral if you want an attorney who does, but everything needs to be handled in the, as it's happening. And in some ways, and this goes for the board members as well on this call, to spend time on what happened in the past eats up your attention, so you cannot move forward as efficiently as you want to. It doesn't mean that there aren't things to go after, but 9 times out of 10, my advice is that's what happened in the past. What we're going to do is do it right moving forward. And I think that's where you need to keep your attention, in my opinion. 11 a.m. What happens when no one or not enough members volunteer to serve as board members? Yeah, it's really difficult because you need at least 3 under 617, and I've seen very small associations have 1 person. You do the best you can, and it becomes an issue when it becomes an issue. But unfortunately, I think that's at the point where you need to speak with your other owners and explain to them their own responsibility in purchasing in a common interest community like a condo or an HOA. Let's see. Each board member certificate must be in the HOA records. So Janet, 1101, 100 or more parcels only has to do with whether you need a website in an HOA, but your board member certificate should be in the official records of the association, regardless of how many parcels are in your HOA. Lillian Conrad 1102, I was talking about the new requirement for contracts to be included with the agenda, and how that was only in the regular and special assessment sections of the statute. But it's never a bad policy to provide the contracts that you're contemplating. Again, think of the statutes and the laws as situations come up, legislatures don't like to hear about them. They try to find a way to make sort of a more balanced and fair environment for owners and board members. And so then they throw things in there like, contracts need to be included. But I will tell you that it's a disputed provision right now, because again, the conservative advice is just add every contract to the agenda. And then the other advice is statutorily, that's not actually what that says. It says that it's only for those meetings of regular and special assessments. What if a board voted for online voting? Oh, yeah, I think I've already had that one. Okay. This is a Zoom meeting, FYI, Chris Hill, just heads up. At 1102. I cannot answer 1104. I don't know the criminal code off the top of my head, but you should check with your attorney around whether a misdemeanor in Arizona is considered a felony here. And just generally speaking, any convictions of sexual predators is generally a felony, but you need to check with your attorney. What is your recommendation for checklists for resigning members? Oh, 1105, Margaret, great idea. I absolutely agree. You should give a checklist to resigning members. I think you should probably have you could even, it's the beginning of the year, I would do an inventory with all your board members. What official records do you have in your possession. What property association do you have in your possession? Do you have keys? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have fobs? I think it's a great thing to do. And I think the beginning of the year is a great time to do that kind of audit. So that would definitely be my recommendation. Thanks for bringing that up. So Laura Samuels, 1105. It's not that the felony was 12 years ago, it's whether his rights were restored. So felons have a right to have their civil rights restored. There's a process to that, and that's what you need to be looking for. Lena Jones, 1106. If a board member resigns, do we need to send an email out to all the residents to fill in the spot? If a board member resigns, the board needs to have a board meeting and determine who they're going to appoint to fulfill that position and or decide not to fulfill it. So it's not about asking, and then there's no requirement that they ask the owners who's interested. Should you and can you include 1107? Should you and can you include the draft board meeting minutes of the prior meeting with your board notice for the next meeting? Is that a good common practice? It is a good practice because generally what are you doing at the top of a board meeting is you're approving the previous meeting minutes. So certainly you can do that. And I think it's a very good practice. And in fact, on all corporate boards, that's what they send to us prior to the next meeting. 1107, regarding this resident changes the AC. I cannot answer that question. It's super fact specific. I need to speak to an attorney about that because liability can change under fact scenarios like that. 1107 John Stone, we clarify the timeline requirements for an owner who wants to show intent to run. So 40 days, so that you send out the notice of intent to run with the first notice at 60 days. At 40 days or 35 days, it's actually 35 days, that notice of intent to run has to be submitted. That is the timeline. And it's also on the slide, so you'll see that again. Ed Bribery, oh, that's a good question. 1108, we send the certification. So I am certified by the state to give this course. We send you the certificate, again, based on who has signed up and stayed on. 1111, can a CAM website be acceptable when it comes to website requirements for an HOA? Super fact specific question. There are requirements on that. And you would have to have your attorney review their website and determine if it could. I'm not saying it couldn't, but I would have to look at it. Is this 4-hour course? This is provided by you, Jane, or is there some other sources? Is there a cost? So let me just clarify for everybody. The Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes through DBPR approves this course education. We receive an outline of what we can teach, like what's required. We submit an outline, they approve us as a provider, and then we can provide the course. We can choose to charge for it, or we can choose to give it for free. We can choose to do it online. We can choose to do it in person. I do not charge for courses myself, whether you're a client or not. And as you notice in this particular webinar, which is hosted by Peggy and Daniel Baum and all of these other sponsors, they reached out to me asking me to teach this because I'm a certified provider of the course. I hope that all makes sense. Are background checks required? 1113 for board members. If so, yeah, no, background checks are not required for board members unless your governing documents state that. John Bagadonis, 1115, if there are only 4 board members, how do you break a tie? Well, that's a good question, right? Because generally you should have an odd number of board members. That's the best practice. Yeah, if you're in that situation, you need to look at your articles and your bylaws and see if you are actually explicitly following Robert's Rules of Order. So I can't give you that answer, but that's where I'm going to head you to. Greater than, I thought the association members can vote to alternate annually between an audit and review for an HOA greater than 500,000. Bruce Perry, 1118. The audit requirement is for 1,000 or more parcels in an HOA. If you have less than 1,000 parcels, then you still would be able to reduce or partially, not reduce, to change the audit requirements. And I didn't speak about that, but you can do that. It is it was one of my bullet points that it could be done by a vote of majority of the owners. 1118, if your SERS is on draft, once it's final is when you have to provide it to the owners, correct? Interesting. I do not have that answer, and I'm a little like, oop, like my brain is glitching. So I will double check that or respond to you. The requirement to give the owners the report is based on when it's completed. So let me take a look at that. That's a really good question, and I will make sure that I come back to that one. And I'll send that out to everybody when I send out certificates. I think that's a good one to answer. Can the annual report be emailed to owners or just posted on the website rather than mailed or hand delivered? In the annual financial report, yeah. So the annual financial report can't just be on the website, but you do have to mail or hand deliver a notice that it's available. Financial report is available for copying and or to request a copy. 11:18, and then this is my last one because we've been going for 15 minutes on questions. I got to keep going. Fully funded or 50% funded for SERS reserves. Can you please clarify? So I'm just going to say it. SERS at this point have to be fully funded. SERS components have to be fully funded. That's what they have to do. Only the other reserve components can be partially funded or waived by a vote, but your SERS funding has to be fully funded. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Are we a good spot, Daniel? Woo, 15 minutes goes fast. Let's go back. All right.
Great, you've answered quite a few questions, Jane.
Okay.
A drink of water or something for yourself, maybe a little oxygen.
Yeah, a little oxygen would be good. Okay. All right. Well, we're in the home stretch. Feels good. 11:45. Actually, does everybody want one more 5-minute break now?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's just.
Good idea. So let's do a 5-minute break right now. It's 11:46. So let's say 11:51, and then we're going to home stretch it. Okay. And you guys are doing great. I can't believe you all are still on 482. I hope some of you are listening, and please keep engaging. I very much appreciate it. And I know the sponsors do as well. All right. So we're going to take a break. See you at 11:52. 11:52.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. 11:52. Thanks. All right, guys, I think it's time to get back. Let's do it. All right. We are going to keep going. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. Let's do it. All right. I hope you're all back. Levying of fines. And I said that this is one option to handle violations of the governing documents. So fining is one option for covenant enforcement. There are other options. I do not go into all of those options in this course because the specific directive of the division was this particular topic, but I will weave that in. Let me put it that way. Okay, so condominiums and HOAs. Associations can levy reasonable fines and suspend area use rights for noncompliance with governing documents. If the governing documents provide the authority, the association can levy reasonable fines for noncompliance with or if the governing documents include Kaufman language. So, one, ask your attorney about the ability to levy fines. And Kaufman language is that case that talks about the declaration is subject to the Condominium Act amended from time to time. Generally speaking, most associations can absolutely levy fines. It's not an issue, and there is a lot of statutory guidance on it, but do check with your attorney. So the way the statute reads for levying of fines is for a condominium association, the maximum fine is, so it's $100 per violation up to $1,000 in the total. It may not become a lien against the property, and I'll come back to the discussion item. In an HOA, the maximum fines may exceed $1,000 if that is permitted in the governing documents. And in HOAs, associations may suspend the rights of their unit owners, their occupants, licensees to use common facilities, common elements, or other association property due to delinquency. So I threw that in there. But must be more than 90 days delinquent and paying a fee, fine, or other monetary obligation due to the association. So we already talked about that in the election portion, but let's deal with this. $100 per day, up to $1,000 in a condo, could exceed $1,000 for an HOA. In either case, may not become a lien against the property. And my discussion item here is around setting a fine schedule. So a lot of our clients prefer to have a fine schedule, very clear. If you don't, if you are found not picking up after your pet, there's a fine, specific fine. If you use the guest parking space, despite the fact you're not supposed to, there's a specific fine. You can do that, but it does not mean it's automatically levied. And so I'll get into that more with how this works. So HOA only, an association may not levy a fine or issue a suspension for leaving garbage receptacles at the curb or at the end of the driveway within 24 hours before or after the designated garbage collection date or time. So this is a new portion of the statute. And I'm smiling because I just think it's so interesting that they only picked these two topics, garbage and holiday lights. So leaving holiday lights or decorations on longer than indicated in the governing documents, unless such decorations or lights are left up for longer than 1 week after the association provides written notice. Basically in HOA, they're saying, look, relax, if it's 24 hours, give them 24 hours. When it's holiday lights, you got to give them at least a week. So it's a change in the statute, which again, I'm chuckling because they pick and choose the areas to do this. So both condominiums and HOAs, a written notice and a chance for a hearing must be given within 14 days notice to the unit owner and the occupant, licensee, invitee, or guest, if applicable, meaning they may be living there, etc. So it's a notice and a chance for a hearing. The hearing process must be conducted by a committee of at least 3 fellow unit owners who are neither board members nor living in a board member's house, and the board must appoint the committee prior, and the best practice is to appoint multiple members to the committee and train them. So let me take you back even farther. When you have a violation of the governing documents, you must first send a notice to that person that there is a violation and you give them a reasonable opportunity to cure. Then if they don't cure that issue, you give them a written notice and a chance for a hearing within 14 days. However, the board must levy the fine. So the board at a duly noticed board meeting needs to levy the fine and state that Jane Bolin did not pick up after her pet. It happened on January 7th in the future, January 7th, 2025 at 10 a.m. We have a photo, and they have to let me know that. But in that case, there's not a reasonable opportunity to cure, right? Because I've already done the thing that can't be undone, right? So at that point, it's written notice and a chance for hearing, but they have to levy that fine against me. So never think that you can use a schedule of fines to just start sort of sua sponte sending out fines to people. The key here is every owner who is going to be given a monetary fine or suspension of use rights has to be given the opportunity to be heard by 3 members who are not board members, not related to board members, or otherwise living with them, and they get due process. This is like a matter of due process. The committee's role is limited to deciding whether to confirm or reject the fines or suspensions imposed by the board. So that takes me to what I just said, right? The board has to levy the fine. So you might have a fine schedule, you have a violation with an opportunity to cure or a violation that cannot be cured. The board at a duly noticed meeting determines that they're going to impose a fine. Now, the committee's purpose is to determine to confirm it or reject it. It's like, yes, we agree with the board, or no, we don't. Decision outcome. If the committee members cannot agree on a decision, fines or suspensions cannot be enforced. If the proposed fine or suspension is approved by the committee, payment is due within 5 days after notifying the unit owner, and if applicable, any tenant, licensee, or invitee, etc. Notification for approved fines. Once approved, the association must inform the unit owner, and if applicable, the unit owner's occupant and invitee in writing through mail or hand delivery. So let me just pause on this addition to the occupant, invitee, or licensee. Oftentimes, associations want to fine folks who are renting a unit, and so they send the fine only, or the notice only to the renter, or they send it only to the owner. The reason that they keep reinstating this is that both the owner is responsible for the actions of their occupant, whether that's a guest or a renter. So if you have the owner has to receive notice, and both the occupant, invitee, licensee, guest has to receive notice as well. Now, you're not going to have their address, I get that, right? But you have to send it to the mailing address of the owner in the records of the association. So why am I saying all that? What do you need to remember after many hours of being on this course? What you need to remember is that fining is very technical, and it has to be done properly with proper notice. And that notice includes not just the owner, but the owner at minimum, and then maybe the person who committed the offense, if that makes sense. Okay. A fine or suspension levied by the board may not be imposed unless the board first provides at least 14 days written notice, stated again, to the designated mailing or email address in the association's records, and again to any occupant, etc., who's being sought to be fined. The key here is you may attend a hearing by telephone or other electronic means. So oftentimes there's been these situations where, someone lives, we like to talk about the snowbirds, but people are traveling. They don't just all stay in Florida, but they can't attend the hearing. So you can and must allow them to attend the hearing that way. Such a committee hearing must be held within 90 days after the issuance of the notice before a committee of 3 people, so that you can't just wait and do it later. It must be done within 90 days of you sending that first demand letter. And again, it can be held electronically by telephone or other means. And it must include a description of the alleged violation, the specific action required to cure the violation, if applicable, and the hearing date, location, access information, if held by telephone or other means. And I would tell you, it has to have that access information regardless. You need to give them away. With 7 days after the hearing, the committee shall provide written notice to the parcel owner, and if applicable, any occupant, licensee, or invitee. Again, these are all the new HOA procedures of the committee's findings related to the violation, including any applicable fines or suspensions that the committee approved or rejected, and how the parcel owner or their invitee, guests, etc., may cure the violation or fulfill a suspension, and or the date by which the fine must be paid. If a violation, now this is super important, if a violation has been cured before the hearing, so you've gone through all this trouble and you've now sent out a violation notice, you've had the board meeting and levied the fine, you've put your finding committee on notice that they're going to have a meeting. If the violation has been cured before the hearing, or in the manner specified in the written notice set forth post the hearing, setting forth the post-hearing results, a fine or suspension may not be imposed. If a violation is not cured and the proposed fine or suspension levied by the board is approved by the committee by a majority vote, the committee must set a date by which the fine must be paid, which date must be at least 30 days after delivery of the written notice setting forth the post-hearing results. All new HOA fine procedures. Also very important, attorney's fees and costs may not be awarded against the parcel owner based on any actions taken by the board before the date set for the fine to be paid. So many times you'll come to us, and you should, as attorneys, to ask us questions about this, and you want to include that. You can't do that. I mean, this is a new change. And I think I would say to you here as well with all of the board members, again, think of the association as a business. There is a cost to doing business. I, as a business owner, have attorneys I pay outside of, even though we are attorneys that support my business. It's the same thing here. And now the statute has made it clear, again, I think because there's been some abuses, especially on the HOA side, as to this. So if a violation of the proposed fine or suspension levied by the board is approved by the committee and the violation is not cured or the fine is not paid as set forth, reasonable attorney's fees and costs may be awarded to the association in a subsequent legal action. So that means they completely ignore you and we have to move forward and take action. Then we can seek attorney's fees. However, attorney's fees and costs may not begin to accrue until the date notice for payment and the time for appeal has expired. So they're just making this super, super clear where you can add attorney's fees and costs and where you cannot. And frankly, I've seen clients just take our bills and try to put them on unit owners' ledgers, which is not a good practice. And if you're doing that, I highly recommend you have a conversation with your attorney about that practice so it can be done properly, because it can create FDCPA violations in the future, which is the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. Okay, final stretch, I believe. Let me just confirm. So notice and meeting requirements. And before I get to that, let me pause and state this. So if you have a violation of the covenants, there's a couple things. Not all declarations of covenants and restrictions or declaration of condominium have nuisance provisions, but many of them do. And that may be sort of a catch-all. This is a nuisance, right? But in order to get to nuisance, you need to send out those letters properly, date, time, violation, what happened, and tell them how to cure it. If you don't do that, when you come to us with all of the issues you've been dealing with for 10 years, it's very hard for us to get a nuisance when we don't have records to deal with. So I'm saying that to you as an attorney, and also, again, think about this as a business. You've got to build that up so it's clear. Next thing, levying of fines is one option for covenant enforcement, but you can also seek pre-suit arbitration in condominiums, and then pre-suit mediation both in condominiums and in HOAs. So in an HOA environment, if someone is violating something over and over and over again, and you can't get a fine committee together because you do not have 3 people who want to raise their hands, we may send them a pre-suit mediation letter that says, hey, you have this violation. We're now saying, if you don't cure this violation, we want to go to remediation with you because we've got to get this resolved before we go to court. Same thing on the condominium side. Prior, most of this was resolved under arbitration, which is with the division of condominiums, timeshares, and mobile homes. They have an arbitration division, which is almost like a mini trial. You pay $50, we file a complaint, and division renders a decision. Now there's an opportunity to do mediation in condominiums as well. And that is not just mediation with your attorney. We hire a licensed trained mediator. Both parties, the owner and the association, splits the cost of that. And those are the ways that you are attempting to resolve covenant enforcement issues. Now, last thing I'm going to say about this before we move on. The best way to solve covenant enforcement issues is to have good rules and regulations, good communication, and to be in communication with your owners. I know that every association has one or two. People are just not listening. They don't care. They've got an unruly spouse or partner. It happens. But, it's hard to deal with human behavior, and all we can deal with is violations of the declaration. And so a lot of times I see, especially in my 20 plus years of experience, that these are personality disputes and we can't deal with them. I mean, oftentimes I say that's not something we can do. So anyway, just want to give you more of a robust look at how to deal with covenant enforcement, which is a great separate class. And I think on the HOA side, you'll see that we'll be able to do covenant enforcement classes. On the condominium side, the continuing education is about changes to the law. But I would encourage all of you as board members to be aware that your community association managers have continuing education requirements. And there is a lot of courses that us attorneys in this space create for those managers that many board members take as well. And usually they're free of cost. So there will be a lot more focused information in those classes, and they're a lot shorter, 1 hour. Okay. 51 minutes to go. Let's do it. All right, notice of meeting requirements. Home stretch. So condo and HOA board meetings, 48 hours in advance, conspicuous place. We've already talked about that. But this is what I think is important. Board meetings held for the purpose of discussing personnel matters have to be posted 48 hours in advance, except in an emergency, but such meetings are not open to unit owners. So there's only 2 places where you cannot have unit owners in attendance, meaning AKA open meeting. And that's if you're one, discussing personnel matters. And what are personnel matters? Who you're hiring for your management or who you're employing as an association, as a business. The second is association attorney meetings. And this is regarding proposed or pending litigation if the meeting is held for the purpose of seeking or rendering legal advice. So proposed or pending litigation, you can have a closed meeting. Now, you need to notice both of them. You have to keep meeting minutes for both of them. But those minutes are pretty redacted to not identify what was closed. So other than that, you need to think that all meetings of the board need to be open and available to the unit owners. Okay. Annual meeting without election and membership meetings are generally 14 days in advance and have to be delivered by mail or electronic transmission, again, to those unit owners who consented in writing to receive electronic notice and a posted notice or pursuant to the condominium documents. But that posted notice always needs to be there. And I know we had that question prior, but you definitely need to post that notice. The Board of a Residential Condominium Association containing more than 10 units needs to meet 4 times a year. We talked about that again. This is a little bit redundant because it's under this particular section, but it's good to hear a couple times. And the things that you can speak about, meaning the unit owners, construction repair projects, status of revenues, expenditures, etc. Okay, we talked about this already. I'm going to say it one more time. Regular special assessment meeting is to be considered. You must have a notice that specifically states assessments will be considered and provide the estimated cost and description of the assessment. So that has not been talked about, and I think it's important. When you're going to pass a special assessment, that special assessment meeting notice probably should go through an attorney review, because we want to be very clear that you have the description and the cost and the payment schedule pro rata for your condominium. Super important. And if you're going to be contemplating contracts at that meeting, those contracts need to be made available. This is the provision, the second bullet that I keep saying there's differing opinions on statutory interpretation versus the conservative view that all meetings need to have contracts. So condominium committee meetings, committees that take final action on behalf of the board or make recommendations to the board regarding the association budget must post notice of their meeting at least 48 hours in advance with an agenda. The meetings must be open to the unit owners. So this is a budget meeting or final decisions on behalf of the board. And let me ask a question. Let's see who can drop this in. What final decision of the board is a committee approving or rejecting that we just talked about? Somebody throw it in the chat. Let me just see if anyone's listening out there. What was it? What did we talk about? What committee did I just talk about? That, yes, fines, Bing, Patrick, you win. Good job. Good job. Oh, so many. Good job. All right, you guys absolutely heard that. Excellent. So again, I said it then, but now we're saying it one more time. Good job, everybody. Is that you must properly notice those meetings and they are open to unit owners. So fine committee meetings are open to unit owners. There's not private hearings. Okay, they're open to unit owners. Committees that do not take final action on behalf of the board or make recommendations to the board regarding the association budget must post their meeting 40 hours in advance with the agenda, and the meetings must be open to the owners unless the bylaws provide otherwise. So what's funny about this, and by the way, this is exactly how the statute reads, is like, you're like, what's the difference here? They have to do the same thing. Yeah, pretty much they have to do the same thing, except when it's not a final action, bylaws may say we don't need to have this open, which would have you think about social committees or bridge committees or other committees that are created by the board. That's what that's for. Okay. HOA committee meetings must be posted 48 hours in advance when a final decision is supposed to be made. And it sounds exactly the same because it is. However, meetings of any committee vested with the power to approve or disapprove architectural decisions with respect to a specific parcel owned by a member of the community or pursuant to the governing document. So in the HOA world, it's very much the same, but what are they thinking about? Architectural review, right? So let's just pause. Condominiums, HOAs, generally there's not an architectural review for a condominium association. Generally in the declaration of covenants and restrictions for an HOA, there's generally an architectural committee that's established, and there's specific things that they're approving or disapproving because of the nature of the community, just different. Okay. I threw this in here. How fun. Bonus new laws in regard to condo covenant enforcement. So let me say this. Both condominiums and HOAs boards have been under scrutiny for using their power to harass individuals. Now, I know board members on this call, you're like, what are you talking about? We get harassed by individuals, and I know that too. But what happened is recently the legislature heard a much louder voice about the board quashing dissent. So what came into existence in the condo world, and I would say could easily be argued for HOA, is that SLAPP suits have come under play. So SLAPP suits are legal actions brought against individuals for speaking out on issues that are important to the public in an effort to silence or discourage such individuals from speaking out. Condominium associations are prohibited from retaliating against unit owners through various means, such as imposing fines, increased assessments, or initiating civil actions, including defamation or tortious interference lawsuits. So I think the key here is there's been a lot of defamation lawsuits recently. Condominium associations are prohibited from fining, discriminatorily increasing a unit owner's assessments, or discriminatorily decreasing services to an owner, or bringing or threatening to bring an action for possession or other civil action, including defamation, libel, slander, or tortious interference. Now, let me just pause on that. I don't know a single condominium board that just individually is increasing assessments against anyone because they're always pro rata. However, they could use a limited special assessment against someone, and that's probably what they've done. So Florida statutes now provide that a unit owner, that for a unit owner to raise the defense of retaliatory conduct, the unit owner must have acted in good faith and not for any improper purposes, such as to harass, cause unnecessary delay, for frivolous purposes, or needless increase in the cost of litigation. So what the statute specifically does, it states that it gives us examples of when a director or association is prohibited from retaliation. So if a unit owner has in good faith complained to governmental agency, let's call it DVPR, with the responsibility for enforcement of a building, housing, or health code of a suspected violation applicable to the condominium, you can't take retaliatory action against them. This would also be if a unit owner called your local city or county to state that there was a SERS violation. You could not take action against them. A unit owner has organized, encouraged, or participated in a unit owner's organization. Now, we all know this is, unit owners can group together. They can create their own little organizations, you gotta let them do that. They can create what they call a neighborhood association. And that would also include, and this is gonna make you cringe for those of you out there, Facebook pages. You know, there's a lot of issues around what's the official Facebook page for a community, and that's something you should talk to your attorney about. But can unit owners basically organize their own? You bet they can, and you cannot retaliate against them. Unit owner submitted information or filed a complaint alleging criminal violations or violations of any of this chapter or other rules of the division, the Office of the Ombudsman or a law enforcement agent, state attorney or attorney general, you cannot retaliate. A unit owner has exercised their rights under 718, which means they filed a complaint, they've done a written inquiry, or sought even arbitration against the association or pre-suit mediation, cannot retaliate. Unit owners complain to the association or the association representatives for failure to comply. So tricky because they can make complaints, or they've made public statements critical of the operation or management of the association. So we cannot be seen, I say we, the board cannot be seen as we're taking any retaliatory action based on that. The association may not use association funds to support such actions against unit owners. Now that's also where I think the legislature heard a very large cry about the boards are using our money to sue us, you know, and so that's why that got put in there. Finally, the statute specifically prohibits condominium associations from expending association funds in support of defamation, libel, slander, or tortious interference against a unit owner or any other claim against an owner based on conduct that was just described. So that's like a major change in the law, and I think something you should all be aware of. I would say as a board member, bottom line is this. Use the covenant enforcement rights, speak with your management companies who understand that as well, speak with your attorneys, deal with violations as they are happening. This, you know, and obviously you can't use these funds to just sue for defamation, libel, etc. There are ways to handle that, and sometimes the opportunity is just not to respond at all, which may blow your mind, but I've seen that in a lot of situations, especially where it's very contentious, that no response is the best response, and then you just continue running the business of the organization, and people can see that in the board meetings, and you know, hopefully you stay in power. But if you don't, it was a volunteer position, and we move on and allow people to get what they need. All right. Last bit, and then we're going to go all questions. So changes to the law for community association managers that impacts how the board works with management. So this is important. Yes, this is important. I think under 468, and I mentioned this earlier, this is the community association statute. There are new requirements of management companies and managers. So the new requirements for managers and management companies is to return all association records within its possession to the condominium association within 20 days after termination of their contractual agreement. If a manager fails to timely return all the official records within their possession, there is what's called a rebuttable presumption, which means it's a presumption that can be overcome, that is created that the managers willfully failed to comply with the statute and subjecting the manager to license suspension and a civil penalty of $1,000 per day up to $10,000 per day, beginning on the 21st day after those records have not been returned. While this says condominium, I absolutely would argue this would apply to any common interest community, condo, cooperative, HOA. Okay. Managers now must disclose conflict of interest. I talked about this slightly when we talked about conflict of interest for board members. A new conflict of interest disclosure requirements are in place. So basically, managers are required to disclose to the board any activity that's reasonably construed to be a conflict. So again, there's a rebuttable presumption that there is a conflict if the following occurs without notice. So a manager or an individual with financial interest in the management firm or a relative of such person enters into a contract for goods and services, or a manager or an individual with a financial interest in a management firm or relative of such person receives compensation or anything of value from an entity that conducts business with the association or proposes to enter into a contract with them, which is a classic kickback statute. And now this is very interesting. So again, remember, this is under 468. This is not in 718. This is not in 720. This is a requirement that an association, that a manager, so essentially a new management requirement that an association to solicit multiple bids from third-party providers if it receives and considers a bid to provide goods or services from a manager or management firm that exceeds $2,500 other than community association management services themselves. So what would those services be? Landscaping, janitorial, etc. If a manager or their relative proposes to engage in activity that is a conflict of interest, the proposed activity and all the contract documents related to the proposed activity must be listed on and attached to the meeting agenda. There must be a disclosure, approval of 2/3 of all the directors present, and the next annual meeting or meeting of members, the existence of the conflict of interest in contract must be disclosed to the members, which I think is pretty incredible. So what happens if a manager violates these provisions for disclosure or otherwise? The association may cancel its agreement with the manager. If the contract is canceled, the association is only obligated to pay for the reasonable value of management services provided up to the time of the cancellation and is not liable for termination fees, liquidated damages, or other form of penalty. If an association enters into a contract in violation of the statute and fails to provide the requisite disclosures, the contract is voidable and terminates upon the association filing a written notice terminating the contract, which contains consent of 20% of the voting interests. Again, you just want to remember you heard this once, but you don't need to memorize it. And I think we're at the end. All right, so now we're going to go all questions to roll it out. So give me 1 second. I've been at a standing desk this whole time, so I'm going to move myself down and answer some questions. Okay.
Well, we got quite a few for you, Jane.
I know we do. And I was talking so fast before. Okay. Let me move these over. Okay. Let's go. I'm going to stop sharing. I think is best, right? Like, let's stop sharing. Okay. Let's talk questions. All right. I'm going to, let me go to the chat first, and then let's go to Q&A. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I've been reminding people to put the questions in Q&A just in case they're not seen by you. I didn't want you to have to scroll through a million.
By the way, I'm smiling because the 100 people who responded with fine committee was great.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So there was just a couple questions here I wanted to get to, and by the way, there's no test at the end of this presentation. That was a good question. Can a board member become part of the fine committee? The answer is no, absolutely they cannot. So that's a good answer, whoever answered that as well. Okay, let me go to the end then. Okay, let's see. Maybe it's just a couple questions and I'll go back over to you. Let's see. When did these constraints on retaliation conduct come into effect? This was July 1, 2024, what I just talked about. It was all new legislation. If a unit owner is harassing a board officer that is leading a construction defects case against a contractor to include verbal and physical actions, is a board member on his own to take legal action, or can the association through the board take? Paul 1219, I would say you should speak to your attorney. You know, people have, this is what I'd say, people have differences of opinion, right? So they think their judgment is the best judgment, but once you're in the business judgment of the association, and if they're truly harassing you, you know, the flip side isn't that owners can harass you, right? I think I would speak to an attorney and see what actions could be taken to send them a strongly worded letter, and then also start to build the case of a covenant violation. Does this only apply to defamation in conduct and other opinionable topics? What if an owner, sorry, it keeps moving. What if an owner had violated the condo docs in other manners? Yeah, so look, I think the slap suit is about, again, not, or let's put it this way, creating a chilling effect against owners to not speak their minds or to organize. They have every right to do that. And on the flip side, the board can't retaliate and cannot sue for defamation, libel, or tortious interference with use of association funds. So if the owner had violated the condo docs in other manners, slap suit's out of the question. Don't even worry about that, right? I would only think about the slap suit section and the fact you've heard it once now if your board says we want to sue an owner for defamation, libel, or slander. That's when I think you need to be like, hold on a second. I think there's a restriction against that. We need to be careful and speak to an attorney. But if the owners are violating the governing documents, don't be chilled by that section. You have every right to do covenant enforcement, and there's no problem with that. Okay. Are there any restrictions on gas grills and placement? So that is 100% based on municipal city code and the configuration. I mean, if you're talking about in a condominium, generally they're not allowed and there's usually prohibition. So I cannot tell you specifically if that's the case in your situation, but generally that's the case. Let's see. Okay, thanks for all the love. I appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Okay, all right, let's go to Q&A. Let's go to Q&A. Let me see here. Q&A, there we go. Whoa, we got a lot. All right. I think I ended at 11:18 or so. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about where you were.
Okay. Are board members at risk? Oh, this is a great question. Are board members at risk if the auditor takes 6 months to complete the year-end audit instead of 90 days? So, Michael, good question. I would tell you you're not at risk because if you have a contract that's signed and ready to go, like you've got the vendor lined up, you're not willfully ignoring it. And the reality is there's just not the resources to get it done. I mean, I would say I'd give a synonymous answer when it comes to SIRS. If board members say, well, we didn't get it done, did you have it under contract? Do we have a signed contract that you know, with a vendor? I think you're okay. I know it's a little unnerving. There's not like a black and white answer on this, but I think you're fine. It's not a problem. Laura Samuels, with the 2-story, you most likely do not have SIRS apply, but you should look at the reinspection requirements of your county just to make sure there isn't any issue. Marsha Bitter, I'm not sending out printed copies of these slides, but there will be an electronic copy as a PDF. Deborah 1120, yes, SIRS is applicable for 3 stories or more. Anonymous attendee 1120. Is there a general rule about how much surplus a condominium association may retain in operating? What if it reaches over 300K? That's a really good question. So there isn't any clear guidance like from the statute. And I don't know of any decisions that talk about surplus being too much or too little. I think the reality is, you know, a surplus is an important thing. And that what is reserves? Reserves are surplus. So if I had a surplus in operating and an association came to me and they said, we have a surplus in operating, what should we do? I would say probably move that over to reserves, right? So let's, you know, keep in mind the end consumer, which is the board members themselves, also unit owners, don't want to increase assessments. So like, let's make a good business decision about what to do with that. But there isn't any general rule on that. 1120, if you approved your budget in October 2024 and were approved for a line of credit and now go to settlement in 2025, what happens when they require a budget line item? Can we wait until October and still use our... So one of the things I'd be clear about is a line of credit shouldn't be collapsed. And I use that word collapse, meaning you should distinguish between a line of credit and reserves, okay? So reserves are required. How you fund them may be by special assessment. It may be by line of credit. In this case, I think that's what you're saying. But I think you should keep those as separate thoughts. They're not the same thing. I've had this conversation often recently around special assessments and SIRS and loans, right? Loans are not special assessments. Special assessments are pro rata. They're done a specific way. How things are paid for, because not everyone can pay their special assessment up front, may require the board to take another action called getting a loan or line of credit. So keep those things separate when you're thinking about that. Can a condo waive their annual audit through a member vote for 2024 and then again 2 years in a row? No, you cannot do it 2 years in a row. It's only good for 1 year. Okay, let me keep going. I just lost my place. Sorry, what was that time that I was just at?
Jane, you're up to Elizabeth's question at 11:23.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. If our HOA dues are only collected once a year and they are not all received in 30 days of each other, multiple deposits need to be made. So that's very specific to what your bylaws and or articles state about your dues being collected annually and when they're late. But the rule, which is an administrative rule around commingling, is a rule from the state that says they have to be transferred within 30 days. So I think it's irrespective of when you get collection, what your collection schedule is for assessments. I think the rule is, bottom line, when you receive a payment, you got 30 days to switch it out, to transfer it out. If the condo has a reserve account that isn't required, does it still have to follow the requirements for required reserves? Oh, so Richard, you want to think of it, in condominiums, there's two reserves. There's the SERS reserves required, and then there's non-SERS reserves now, not required, but are required to be fully funded, but can be partially funded or waived. So again, the overarching is that all reserves are required in a condo. Now you have two types of reserves. One is an absolute, the other one is subject to a vote. That's the best way I think to explain it. Can we still have pooled reserves voted by owners? Yes. I don't know if Frank 1126, if you're talking about a condo or an HOA, the decision to go, if you have straight line reserves and you want to pool them, you'd require a vote. If you have no votes, no reserves at all, and you're voting to create them, then in an HOA, then you could vote to create reserves, and then the board could choose if it's going to be pooled or line itemed. So it probably requires a little bit more facts for me to answer that, but that's the best response I can give you now. If a condo's revenues exceeds a certain amount of money, and the owner's intends to waive the requirements for an audit in support of the cash receipts and expenditures prepared by the management company. So Robert, I would say first, let me explain this to everyone. So your annual reporting requirements have these monetary thresholds, right? 150,000 less cash receipts and expenditures, 150 to 300 compiled, and then 300 to 500 reviewed, 500 plus audited. The opportunity to use a lower, or like to otherwise say, instead of audit, we're going to do this, except for in HOAs, where if you have 1,000 parcels or more, you must audit. The decision to even put that to a vote is the decision of the board. It's not an automatic right of the owners to have that vote. It is a board decision to say, we want to put forth a vote to change the annual reporting requirement. And this is synonymous to non-SERS reserves are always required to be fully funded. Boards could have just been fully funding them the whole time. It was up to the board to put forth to the owners the opportunity to waive or partially fund. So when I talk about the unit owner vote right in these two situations, it is something the board has to determine they want to provide to the owners. The owners, the way the statute reads, the owners don't have some affirmative right to say, we just want to vote on it. That's not the case. So I hope that distinction helps you. And it was a great question, because a lot of people don't understand that. That it is the board's decision first to put that forth to the owners. So great question. Thank you. Okay. If an owner's out of the country state, can they vote? Oh yeah, we already talked about that one. Let me keep going. Can monies, I'm going to just Joe Golden 1129. Can monies from reserves be used to pay income taxes? Must there be a line in the reserve such expense? Yeah, you cannot just use money from reserves to pay income taxes. You would have to have a reserve account for income taxes. So I understand what you're saying about higher interest rates earned, but that's exactly the point of it, right? So yeah, you need to have your own line item. So anonymous attendee, I think this, next couple of questions around credit card, debit card. So it speaks to debit card particularly, and why? Because debit card gives you a 4-digit PIN that allows you to pull out cash. I know a lot of credit cards, or let me say this way. I know a lot of banks issue debit cards that have the ability to be used as a credit card, right? But that is still a debit card. If the board wants to take out its own line of credit as a true credit card, then you're okay. The statutes aren't talking about credit card use. They're talking about debit card use. And again, the distinction is that debit cards that are issued by banks generally have a MasterCard or Visa opportunity with them. But yes, no, you cannot use that. That's still a debit card. I hope that explains that. Yes, a lot of these questions. Okay, so I think I just did that. Richard DeLuca, 1132. Do official records include emails from board members from their private emails? So there is an arbitration decision that says that private emails must be brought forth as an official record if private emails were used instead of like, your board, Jane's Association at gmail.com. So if I use Jane at PeytonBolin.com to do association business, if I'm on the board, then I would have to put forth that email as an official record if I was using it for board business. It is really a fine line and requires a lot of interpretation for us to actually look at that. So, okay, if a fine has been levied and the new board comes in and feels the fine was not in line with the offense, can the new board reduce or cancel the fine? Christopher Beckel, that is a really good question that I've not been asked. So generally, again, I'm going to speak out loud my thinking here. The board has to levy the fine and then the committee has to approve or reject it. Okay. So if a new board comes in, yeah, I would talk to your attorney and take a look at the opportunity to say that we are going to reverse the board's decision to levy that fine. That's probably how I would address it, as the board changing their decision to not levy that fine. It wouldn't be allowed to just, yeah, that's how I'd look at it. But again, there's nothing in the statute that tells you how to do that. So you're going to have to talk to your attorney, but that's probably how I think about it. Okay, is there a limit to a fine from an HOA about something very small and not informed of in rules and writing, and they use a statute number? Is there a limit to a fine? So the limit to the fine is, it's $100 per day, but it can be more than $1,000 depending on the declaration. This idea that something's very small or you didn't know anything about the rules, it seems a matter of fact, and I can't interpret that per se. They can say that you violated a statute, but I don't know what portion of the statute they'd say you'd be violating, so you'd have to take a look. But if that's the kind of situation where, as an individual owner, if that happened to you, you'd probably want to seek legal advice. And again, we do not do that. We represent condo association boards. But if you need a referral, I'm happy to give you one. If your condo is less than 3 stories, again, it's 3 stories or more is the SERS requirement, but all condos should have fully funded reserves unless you choose to vote to provide the opportunity for unit owners to vote to partially waive or fund. If you had a structural engineering inspection done in conjunction with SERS, not receive the SERS report, would have a rough estimate. Can the funds continue to be housed in a pool? Yeah, anonymous attendee at 1135, that is a really difficult question for me to answer because they're actually different issues. So I wouldn't be, the purpose of a structural integrity reserve study is to determine how to fund those reserves. So the point is not to go rough estimate. The point is to get that study and determine that, because again, there's a reason we're not doing that study, and there's a reason that architects and engineers are doing it, because there's an actual formula to it, right? So, the capital, the expected useful life, the deferred maintenance costs, the expenditure cost. So I just would separate those issues. That's the best I can tell you there. What's your recommendation for a checklist for resigning? I think I addressed that. I think it's a good question and you should do it. But first you need to know what inventory they have. So just like any business, I know what everybody owns and has of our property. So if they're resigning from the firm, I would know what to ask them for. Is the board property manager allowed to charge the unit owner for their request for financials in a condo association? No. So requests for financial information, they cannot, so you're not allowed to have a charge. If you're doing an official records request, and they're not bringing in their own portable technology, you could charge 25 cents per page. But you can't charge them for their request outright, like some sort of fee. What is the statute of limitations for statute violations? That depends on what the statutory violation is. I will tell you just generally, there's a 5-year statute of limitations for a breach of contract. And the condominium declaration and the declaration of covenants and restrictions for an HOA is a contract. Are text messages and emails deemed official records? So yeah, we don't have any, it's a great question, anonymous attendee at 1138. With all of the new criminal sanctions, it makes everybody, including all association practitioners like myself, uncomfortable, because there's disappearing platforms, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're in a space where we're going to have to see how this gets interpreted. I don't have an answer. I mean, emails are definitely considered official records if they're used for the purpose of association business. Text messages, we have no ruling on that, so that's going to be hard to say. Okay, let me go about. I just lost. Sorry.
11:39.
11:39. Thank you. So it keeps jumping, Daniel, because like people add something and it just like jumps. I'm like, ah.
No worries.
Do we have to do the 4-hour class annually or every 4 years? So it's not annually. It's every 4 years in an HOA and every 7 in a condo, and then you have the 1-hour requirement. What happens if a board member resigns and there are 4 voting members left? Yeah, same thing. I mean, you have a deadlock, you have a deadlock. You need to see if you're subject to the Robert's Rules of Order that has some opportunity to deal with the deadlock. But yeah, you're stuck. No action if you have a deadlock. Let's just be clear, no action. If the board has a Zoom meeting with a provider to review his proposal, is that considered a meeting? No, I would tell you they shouldn't make any decisions at that. And it needs to be brought up at an open meeting. But oftentimes you interview service providers all the time with their proposals. And I would say that's not it. If you want to be very careful, make sure you don't have a quorum. Does an officer have to be a board member in an HOA? That's a very good question. So the Articles of Incorporation, the bylaws identify, and I would tell you that everyone that's elected to an HOA or condo is elected as a director. Then you have what's called an organizational meeting and you choose the officers. So you're not running for president or vice president because those are officer positions. The directors are done as a slate, and then those directors choose the officers. And you would have to check your governing documents specifically because I have seen that you can have officers for a board that are not actually members of the board. So it's strange, but I've seen it in documentation before. Okay, so we talked about the credit card thing. So Laura Samuels, 1143. There is very little leeway. So if somebody owns a unit, to stop them from residing in their unit is not generally in the realm of possibility. If someone is trying to buy into a unit and they have, I'm just going to use like the sort of the worst scenario, they're a sexual predator, and the association has the right to deny potential purchases, yeah, they could deny them. Or if the association has a right to deny rentals, that would be a good reason to deny. But if somebody lives in their unit and they have that and they've already been in there, you would be addressing that, unfortunately, in a very different way. I've seen that where we've looked at with particularly sexual predators, because it could happen. Are they within so many feet of a school, et cetera, et cetera? That might give us some leeway. But I think it's sort of a myth to think that associations can simply not let people like reside in their units. You need to probably start with a baseline that's not a possibility, but let's talk and figure out what we can do. I think that's the best way to look at it. If a board originally consists of 7 members and 4 have resigned, can the remaining 3 still hold a monthly board meeting? Yeah, so quorum is based on the number of board members. So it's not, if you have 7 board members and 4 resign, you have 3 remaining. If you're not required to appoint the other 4 because, statutorily you have the minimum. Then quorum is of the 3, it is not of the 7. So quorum is of the 3, not of the 7. Is there a time limit to serve as a board? Not in HOA world, but in condo world, it's 8 years currently, with the exceptions that, of course, other people aren't running, that there aren't enough people to run, etc. I did not catch the question, what percentage of unit owners are required to change the existing rental rules? So Tyrone 1147, there's not a hard and fast number. This is entirely dependent on your governing documents. And when you're looking at that, you need to look at the amendment language. That will tell you what the threshold vote will be. Can questions not on the official agenda be brought up at a board meeting, or do they need to be on the next agenda? So one, depends on who's asking that question. So unit owners have the right to speak on any agenda items. So that's one. Two, board members can certainly amend the agenda at the meeting. So that's a possibility. And if you feel like there's an item you want to discuss and the board says you can't discuss it because it's not an agenda item, then you kick into the 20% petition to have the item added to the agenda so you can say something about it at the next one. That's how I would handle that. Is there a required time for parcel owners to submit agenda items? So Doug, 1149, owners do not submit agenda items unless they're doing the 20% petition. The board has the sole authority to create the agenda. They do not need to seek input from unit owners. And that's why the statute has a 20% opportunity for you to add an agenda item if desired. Do financials have to be given to potential buyers? They don't have to, but if you're an owner and your potential buyer wants financials, which they're going to ask for more and more, you bet. And then under FAQs, and in the condo world, there is a requirement that you provide specific information. Moreover, there's estoppel requirements that require that you disclose a bunch of financial information about the association, particularly related to assessments and special assessments. For wording regarding enforcement of the HOA, do we need to establish an independent fines committee? Yes. So Bruce Rocks 1153, you have to have a separate committee for fining, different from any of the HOA committees. So it's a very separate committee, and as I stated, should probably be trained in advance. Can reserve funds be used to pay fines against the association by the county? The answer is no, unless you have a line item for reserve funds for fines against the county. Reserve funds are for capital expenditures, period. And that's what they're for. So the answer is no. Is that 1,000 refundable? I think the only 1,000 we've talked about is in terms of fines. So if you are going to dispute a fine by an association that is $1,000, you would need to win in a court of law. Barry Milberg, 1156. I have a lot to comment on this. State limitations on fines and no lien makes fines not really useful. 100%. I think they're totally useless. The only time they matter is that when you're actually selling your unit, and there's no teeth when you cannot foreclose on that and make it a lien. I 1,000% agree. And so my comment is, let's get the legislature to change it. Can boards make decisions for what is the amount of the fines? That is actually, yes, the board is making the decision on the amount of fine, and they're determining that they want to levy the fine, and then the committee will either accept it or reject it. So the board is doing that. Do we need the fine to be in the bylaws? So 1156, both statutes provide for fining, but there is an analysis to look at your documents just to determine that you can use the fining provisions. What does the city say about bulk pickup can stay out longer than your HOA docs? Christina Toker, 1157. That is a really good question. I don't have an answer to. I would tell you that the HOA, even if there's bulk pickup by the city, that the HOA still could have a more strict requirement that you only leave it out, and again, with that change in the law that we talked about, 24 hours, that you'd have to follow the HOA documents. It could be more stringent than the cities. These changes that are being presented in the seminar, do they need to be incorporated in the association governing documents and recorded? So Kelvin, what I'm talking about is statutory provisions, and the statutes, I don't want to say they control, right? Because there's always an analysis, but Anything that's in the statute most likely does not need to be incorporated into your governing documents. In fact, when boards come to me to do amendments and they want to do a full I say, let's not do what's in the declaration, or let's not do what's in the statute. It's unnecessary, right? Like, let's stay focused on what's hypersensitive to your association and your space. 12 o'clock, Thomas, fines for HOA daily max allowed. I see for condos 100 days, 1,000. Yeah, in HOA, you can't surpass 1,000 if your governing documents allow you to. Can an all-year renter be allowed on a committee? Generally, committees are made up of unit owners. Meryl, I'm not going to say that your governing documents might allow a non-owner to be on a committee, but generally speaking, it is unit owners. How do you enforce a fine if someone refuses to pay? John Bagdonis, 1202, you sue them. It's a breach of contract. You've given them, they've breached the contract. There's an amount that's owed. We sue them, and sometimes in small claims court. Can the fining committee decide to postpone a case to the next meeting rather than approving or rejecting? Sure. A fine committee could decide to postpone a meeting or adjourn a meeting early. So that's a possibility. A person needs to pressure wash his roof. So Elizabeth Goodbread at 12:05. What I'm going to say about your comment is, if the violation is cured before the fine, you cannot impose a fine. I don't think you need a fine to force someone to do something, but I do think you need to send them a proper violation letter. Alan, 12:05, really, that's actually a fact-specific question, but generally, I can always go against somebody who causes and creates damage, but I'm sure there's a whole lot of facts behind that, so just keep that in mind. Is the fine committee open to the community? Yes, 12:06, yes, you bet. Do you need to amend your declaration in order to exceed a 1K limit? Yes, you do, and that would require a membership vote based on whatever your documents say. Peggy Judd, I have a separate class on emotional support animals and service animals, completely separate and a good full hour on its own. Is it a good practice for the board to communicate directly with owners or only the management company? That's a matter of preference, I would say to you, matter of preference. I think it's a good idea to communicate as much as you can. If the fining committee does not approve a fine, is a violator still eligible for pre-suit mediation or litigation? Yes. Good question, Frank Miller. If your committee says we reject the board's decision, the board can say, no problem. We're going to send a pre-suit mediation letter. They're not mutually exclusive opportunities to do covenant enforcement. Yes, you can. Is notice to owners necessary if discussing personal compensation? So it's not notice to owners, but if you're going to have a closed board meeting to talk about personnel, James Steiner at 12:11, then you still have to have the proper board notice, which is 48 hours in advance in a conspicuous place. There's not a time frame, 12/12, to submit the 20% petition for agenda items, but that does have to be taken up within, I believe it was 60 days. Okay, let me keep going here. Lena Jones, 12:12, you need to be sure that the governing you review your governing documents as to how often and frequent you need to have meetings. It's only this year that in the condominium statute, they require that there at least be 4 quarterly meetings, which is kind of befuddling because it's always been a matter of governing documents. Annual meeting notices can be emailed if consent is given. Correct, 12:13. If it's not, if consent is not given, you must mail it. Brian, hold on, I think I skipped something. Okay, 12:12. Brian Daniels?
Brian.
Okay. What statutes and rules for owners objecting the approved budget and process? So there isn't anything about the owners having the right to not approve the budget. There are some considerations generally in the governing documents about a budget being more than a certain threshold percentage from the previous year, but the budget is absolutely the purview of the board. It is the business of the association. Fine committee meetings are open and notice to owners. Can an owner not show up and appoint another individual in their place? Alexander 1215, they would need to do a power of attorney to do that. A limited special assessment, Raymond 1218 is a special assessment against a specific unit only. So generally special assessments pro rata across the board, but sometimes you'll have what's called a limited special assessment against one particular unit owner for a piece of the common element that they have exclusive use of. And it's very specific and you'll need to talk to an attorney about it, but that's what that is. How long is a unit owner's guest? Consider the guest. Yeah, 1218 entirely depends on what your governing documents are interpreted as. Fine committees are open to everyone in the association. Those are open meetings. The RUMIA 1222, that what I talked about with the records return, is that retroactive. It's a new law as of July 1. So yeah, we can't, I mean, if you had a situation happen last year, before that was the statute, before July 1, you wouldn't be able to hold them to account to that. If you have not received information from a management company, 1223, you should file an official records request and or written inquiry to your association. And 1225, you need to read your contract with your management company before you terminate it. There's always provisions for termination and the like. Okay, I cannot do any more questions because I got to end right on time, and it's 12:59. I got through as many as I could. I very much appreciate all of your time. There's a whole lot of people on this, so I'm going to have my team start the certificates today. And if you have any specific questions, please reach out to me. Again, Jane Bolin with PeytonBolin. Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, team. And I'll see you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Great job today.